Hello, dear listeners. Before we begin, please set your volume just right. Not too loud, not too soft. Close your eyes, lie still, and let the world grow quiet around you. Together, we will drift into sleep, carried gently by tonight's story. This is the very first in our series of boring history for sleep. And now, let us begin with the tale: how wooden temples survived earthquakes in Japan. If you enjoy these calming journeys, please remember to like this video and subscribe, so you can join us again tomorrow night. Long ago in the islands we now call Japan, people lived with the constant reminder that the ground beneath their feet was never entirely still. The islands rest on shifting plates of the earth, and so earthquakes were not rare events, but rather a natural rhythm of life. Over centuries, these tremors shook homes, fields, castles, and even cities. Yet, through time, certain wooden temples built many hundreds of years ago remained standing, their tall towers rising quietly against the sky, while stone walls and other heavy structures collapsed. To understand why these temples endured, we must travel back to the earliest centuries, when Japanese builders began shaping their ideas of sacred architecture. In those days, wood was the most abundant material. The forests of Japan were dense with cedar, cypress, and pine. These trees were tall and straight, and their timber was both light and strong. Stone, though lasting in other cultures, was less common in Japanese construction because it was heavy and brittle under the movement of the earth. The builders came to see that what bent and swayed might last longer than what tried to remain rigid. They observed the trees in storms and learned that flexibility was a form of strength. Out of this observation, they began to design their temples. The pagoda, a tall tiered structure often rising 5 stories high, became one of the most remarkable examples of this knowledge. At first glance, it seems impossible that such a tall wooden tower could endure centuries of earthquakes. But within its design lies a quiet wisdom. The core of the pagoda, called the shinbashira, is a central wooden pillar that runs vertically through the structure. It does not always touch the very bottom or the very top, but it acts as a spine, allowing the whole building to move gently as the ground shifts. Instead of resisting the earth's motion, the pagoda sways, releasing the energy through its joints. Each level of the pagoda is built with wide eaves and wooden brackets. These layers are not fused together into a single solid block, but rather are allowed a degree of separation. When the earth shakes, the levels move slightly against each other, dispersing the force rather than concentrating it. The builders did not use nails or fixed bolts in the way modern builders often do. Instead, they used complex joinery, wooden interlocks that fit together firmly yet still permitted movement. It is a method of building that values patience and craftsmanship, where every beam is carved with precision to slide into another. Over time, as the earth trembled again and again, these joints absorbed the shocks, flexed, and then settled back into place. What seems fragile is, in fact, resilient. The philosophy behind such structures was not purely technical. It reflected a broader way of thinking in Japanese culture, one that understood impermanence and change as natural. Temples were not built to fight nature, but to exist in harmony with it. The builders accepted that earthquakes would come, just as storms and seasons would, and they shaped their work to flow with those forces. A temple that still stands after 1,000 years does so because it learned to move instead of resist. Travelers from other lands often wondered at this. They saw castles and stone towers crumble in their homelands, while in Japan, slender wooden towers remained. Some described the temples as if they were living beings, swaying like tall grasses rather than breaking like brittle stone. The science behind the survival may not have been written in technical terms, yet it was deeply understood in practice. As generations passed, the methods were handed down from master carpenters to apprentices. The knowledge was never hurried. Every piece of wood was chosen carefully, sometimes left to season for years before being used. Cypress, especially, was valued for its durability and scent. When raised into beams and pillars, it carried both strength and a sense of sacredness. These choices were not accidental. They were the quiet calculations of builders who measured time not in years, but in centuries. Some of the oldest pagodas in Japan, such as those at Horyuji, have stood since the 7th century. They have seen wars, fires, and countless quakes, yet still they rise above the landscape. To walk among them is to feel the patience of history itself, a reminder that endurance often lies in gentle adaptation rather than rigid defense. And so, when the ground shakes beneath Japan, the temples do not fight. They breathe with the earth, their wooden bones flexing, their joints whispering, their layers shifting slightly and then returning to stillness. They survive not through defiance, but through understanding. In this way, wooden temples have become more than sacred sites. They are lessons in resilience, quiet guardians of a people who have always lived with the trembling of the earth. This is the beginning of their story, and in the nights to come, we will drift further into the details of how these structures were imagined, shaped, and preserved through centuries of quakes and time itself. To continue this quiet journey into the world of wooden temples in Japan, we must look not only at their outer form, but also at the deeper traditions that guided their construction. The builders of old did not simply cut timber and raise beams. They approached the act of building as a spiritual practice, a dialogue between human effort and the natural world. When a great temple was planned, the first step was not to draw blueprints, but to choose the right forest. The mountains of Japan were seen as sacred, filled with ancient trees that had grown for hundreds of years. To cut one down was not a matter of convenience, but of reverence. Rituals were performed before felling a great cypress, offerings made to the spirit of the tree, prayers whispered for its rebirth in another form. The wood was then seasoned carefully, left to rest under the sun and the wind for years, until it reached a perfect balance of strength and lightness. Builders knew that fresh wood held too much moisture and would twist, while wood allowed to breathe became stable and enduring. In this way, every beam carried both the patience of nature and the patience of men. The shaping of the wood was another form of devotion. Without nails or iron, carpenters carved elaborate joints, fitting tongue into groove, mortise into tenon, so that each piece would lock firmly with the next. These joints were more than technical solutions. They were an art form, each one designed to allow the building to flex with the shaking earth. It was said that a skilled carpenter could build a temple strong enough to last 1,000 years, and yet no nail would be seen. To visitors, this seemed a miracle, but to the builders, it was the natural result of discipline and inherited knowledge. As the pagoda rose, story upon story, its layers were arranged not for grandeur alone, but for balance. Each tier was slightly smaller than the one below, creating a tapering form that lowered the center of gravity. The wide eaves, curving outward like wings, spread the weight and cast shadows that cooled the walls. When the earth trembled, the movement of these eaves created a counterbalance, like sails shifting in a steady wind. The central pillar, the shinbashira, was sometimes suspended rather than fixed, allowed to hang free within the tower. When an earthquake struck, the pillar swayed independently, its motion absorbing the shock, while the rest of the structure followed gently. Modern engineers would later study this design and find it remarkably similar to what they call a tuned mass damper, a system used in skyscrapers to resist strong winds and tremors. Yet the Japanese carpenters had discovered this principle centuries earlier, guided by observation rather than mathematics. Beyond the pagodas, even the great halls and shrines shared the same wisdom. Instead of anchoring walls deep into stone foundations, the builders placed them lightly on raised platforms. The buildings rested on their bases rather than being fused with them. This meant that when the earth shifted, the whole structure could glide slightly rather than crack. It was as if the buildings floated on their foundations, moving with the tremor and then settling back into place. Again and again, this gentle adaptability proved more lasting than rigid resistance. The aesthetic of the temples also reflected this philosophy. The lines of the roofs were curved, the surfaces of the wood left visible, the spaces open and airy. Nothing was sealed into a suffocating weight. Air and light flowed freely through the halls, and with them, movement was also allowed. Visitors stepping inside such a temple felt not the heaviness of stone, but the breathing presence of wood, warm and alive even after centuries. Fires sometimes consumed these temples, for wood is always vulnerable to flame. Yet time after time, they were rebuilt, often using the same foundations, the same carpentry traditions, and sometimes even salvaged beams that had survived. Earthquakes might shake them, storms might batter them, but the rhythm of rebuilding became part of the endurance itself. To rebuild was not to start again, but to continue the story, each generation adding its touch to the line of survival. When we speak of temples surviving earthquakes, it is not only the single structure that endures, but the tradition, the knowledge, and the spirit of adaptation. These temples are both fragile and eternal, both temporary and lasting. They remind us that survival is not the absence of change, but the ability to live with change. Travelers who visit today may not always notice the subtle details. They see only the graceful roofs, the silence of the wooden pillars, the quiet courtyards where moss grows on stones and lanterns. Yet hidden in those beams are centuries of shaking and swaying, a record of countless tremors that came and passed, leaving the temple still standing. And in that silence, one may hear not defiance but harmony, the gentle acceptance that what moves may last longer than what refuses to move. Thus, the story of Japanese wooden temples is not only about architecture. It is about a way of seeing the world, a way of accepting the uncertain ground beneath our feet, and finding strength in the very act of bending. The carpenters of long ago, without knowing it, built not just places of worship, but lessons in resilience, whispered through wood and time. And so the night deepens, and as you rest, you may imagine those tall pagodas swaying gently in the moonlight, their beams creaking softly, their layers breathing with the earth, unbroken through centuries of tremors. Their secret is simple. To endure, one must learn to move. As we move deeper into the quiet history of Japanese temples, it is worth pausing to imagine what life was like for the people who lived in their shadow. For villagers and townsfolk in ancient Japan, the temple was not only a sacred site, but also a steady presence in a world that often trembled beneath them. When an earthquake shook the ground, homes might collapse, walls might split, and people would run into the open fields. Yet when the shaking ended, they would often look toward the tall pagoda that still stood firm against the sky. It became a symbol not only of faith, but of reassurance, a reminder that something greater than stone and clay could survive the restlessness of the earth. In this sense, the endurance of temples was psychological as well as physical. To know that the sacred tower remained standing brought calm to communities, for it showed that survival was possible even in the face of great destruction. The story of these temples is therefore not only about wood and joinery, but about trust, memory, and continuity. Families carried memories of quakes from one generation to the next, and alongside those memories was the image of the temple, still present, still unbroken. This collective memory became woven into the culture itself, shaping how people thought of architecture, resilience, and even beauty. The Japanese sense of beauty has often embraced imperfection and transience, concepts known as wabi-sabi, and in the temples one can see this philosophy made solid. The wooden beams darken with age, the joints creak softly, the layers lean ever so slightly with the passing centuries. Yet none of this is seen as ruin. Instead, it is seen as life. A temple that carries the marks of earthquakes is not diminished but dignified, just as a tree that bends in storms grows wiser in its crookedness. Over time, travelers, scholars, and later scientists began to study these buildings, wondering why they endured while other forms of architecture failed. In the modern era, engineers have built models, shaken them on platforms that simulate earthquakes, and confirmed what the carpenters of centuries past already knew, that flexibility and separation of layers are more powerful than rigid unity. Each level of the pagoda moves slightly out of phase with the others, so the force of the quake is never concentrated but distributed, like ripples across a pond. The central pillar acts as a silent counterweight, stabilizing the tower without locking it in place. These findings astonish modern minds, yet for centuries they were simply lived truths, carried on through apprenticeships, spoken by masters who taught their students not only how to cut wood, but how to watch the sway of trees, how to feel the breath of the earth. The temples also carried stories and legends that deepened their meaning. Some believed the Shinbashira was a spiritual axis, connecting the heavens and the earth, a cosmic spine around which the world turned. Others said that the pagoda itself was like a great prayer, each tier a step upward toward enlightenment, and that its survival through earthquakes showed the protection of divine forces. Whether seen as sacred or scientific, the result was the same: the buildings endured. It is also worth remembering that earthquakes in Japan have never been gentle events. Whole cities have been destroyed, thousands of lives lost, fires and tsunamis following the shaking ground. Yet again and again, amidst the ruins, wooden temples stood, their bells unbroken, their gates still casting shadows. To the survivors, this was not merely structural success, but a source of courage. In the calm that followed disaster, the temple became a place to gather, to mourn, to hope. Thus its survival shaped not only engineering, but also the soul of a people. Even today, when modern skyscrapers and concrete bridges rise across Japan, the ancient wooden temples remain, their design still respected, their wisdom still echoed in the technology of earthquake-resistant buildings. Engineers speak of base isolation, of tuned mass dampers, of flexible joints, yet at heart, these are the same lessons taught by carpenters who once watched trees swaying in mountain winds. The past has not vanished. It has simply been translated into steel and glass. And so, in the quiet of night, when one imagines the land trembling, one can also imagine the pagoda swaying gently, its wooden tiers shifting like breath, its central pillars swinging like a pendulum. And in that graceful motion lies survival. The people of Japan learned to live with the earth not by conquering it, but by listening. And the temples are the clearest whispers of that lesson. They remind us that strength is not always the hardest stone, nor the heaviest wall, but the gentle resilience that moves with change. In their survival, we see a philosophy made visible, one that teaches patience, humility, and the acceptance of impermanence. As the centuries passed, this way of building became a cultural inheritance, a thread binding past and present. And now, as you rest and drift into dreams, you may carry with you the image of these timeless towers, rising tall yet bending gently, firm yet yielding, a lesson of how to stand through storms by learning how to sway. To continue the slow unfolding of this story, we can turn our attention to the master carpenters who shaped these temples with their hands and their traditions. Known as miyadaiku, these builders belonged to a lineage that stretched back many centuries. Their training was not measured in years, but in decades, often beginning when a boy was still very young and continuing into the maturity of his life. Apprentices lived alongside masters, learning not through books, but through observation, repetition, and the gradual passing down of techniques too subtle to be explained in words. To carve a joint that would last for centuries required not only steady hands, but a steady mind, for patience was as important as skill. The miyadaiku studied the grain of the wood, understanding how each piece would bend or flex, how moisture would shift through the seasons, how the sun and wind would slowly alter its form. They knew that no two beams were identical, and so each cut was unique, shaped for its place in the greater harmony of the structure. This harmony was not only mechanical, but also spiritual. Temples were seen as living entities, their beams like bones, their roofs like breath. To work on them was to participate in something larger than oneself. The builders understood earthquakes not as disasters alone, but as reminders that the world was in motion. And so they designed temples as if they too were alive, able to breathe and move. In the long nights of winter, apprentices would carve practice joints again and again, repeating until the pieces slid together without force, holding firm without nails. Over time, the joinery became second nature, a language of wood passed silently from hand to hand. When the great pagodas rose, tier after tier, each layer carried not only beams and brackets, but also the invisible devotion of these carpenters. Every cut, every alignment, every curve was shaped with the knowledge that the earth would one day tremble beneath it, and so each choice carried the weight of survival. When earthquakes struck, and the temple swayed but did not fall, the carpenter's craft was vindicated, though they themselves often faded into anonymity, their names forgotten while their work endured. This humility was part of the tradition. The glory was not for the builder, but for the temple, and beyond that, for the spirit it housed. As generations passed, the continuity of knowledge was tested. Wars burned cities, fires consumed wooden halls, and yet each time the temples were rebuilt, the miyadaiku returned, reapplying the same wisdom, carving the same joints, aligning beams with the same care. It is this cycle of destruction and renewal that has allowed the architecture to remain not only standing, but alive. The survival of temples is therefore not only a story of resilience against earthquakes, but of resilience against time itself. Each rebuilding was an act of remembrance, a quiet refusal to let the knowledge fade. Modern scholars who study these temples often speak in technical terms: seismic response, oscillation frequencies, dynamic damping. Yet beneath these terms lies the simplicity of carpenters, watching trees in the wind, listening to the creak of wood, shaping their craft to echo the rhythms of nature. The temples embody this listening, and through it they endure. Imagine walking through a great wooden hall after centuries have passed. The floorboards are polished by countless footsteps. The beams above are darkened with age. The scent of cypress still lingers in the air. Outside, the earth may shift, the mountains may rumble, but inside the hall there is stillness. You run your hand along the pillar and feel the grain of a tree that once stood tall in a forest 1,000 years ago, now standing tall in another form, still alive in its way. This is the quiet endurance of wood, flexible, breathing, patient. In this way, the temples are not monuments of stone, but companions of time. They do not defy the earth, but live with it. And through this harmony, they survive. For the people of Japan, this survival has always carried meaning. After each quake, after each fire, to see the temple still standing or rebuilt again was to see continuity in a world of impermanence. It offered not only shelter, but reassurance, a reminder that even as the ground trembles, life continues, and that strength can be found not in resistance, but in yielding. This lesson, repeated through centuries of shaking, became part of the cultural fabric, shaping not only architecture, but also philosophy and art. The Miyadaiku may never have spoken in such terms, but their work expressed it wordlessly, beam by beam, joint by joint. And so, as you drift deeper into rest, you may picture these carpenters at their work, chisels in hand, eyes calm, shaping the pieces that will one day sway gently with the earth. Their quiet labor, carried across generations, is the hidden heartbeat of the temples. Without their devotion, the structures would not stand, but with it, they rise, serene and enduring, even as the world moves around them. When we think about how these wooden temples survived through centuries of earthquakes, it is also important to reflect on the larger cultural world in which they were created. Japan has long been shaped by its geography, an island nation resting on the edges of tectonic plates, its mountains steep, its forests dense, its coasts exposed to both storms and waves. Earthquakes were never isolated events. They came as part of a natural cycle that also included typhoons, floods, volcanic eruptions, and fires. In such a world, permanence was never guaranteed, and so people learned to build with an awareness of impermanence. This awareness touched not only architecture, but poetry, art, and daily life. The cherry blossoms that bloom briefly and fall, the tea ceremony that values a cracked cup as much as a perfect one, the gardens that change with the seasons. These were not simply aesthetic choices, but reflections of a deep cultural truth. Nothing lasts unchanged, and beauty lies in acceptance of this fact. The temples, with their swaying beams and breathing joints, embodied this truth in physical form. They were not monuments to eternal immobility, but structures designed to live in rhythm with the earth. Their very survival through earthquakes demonstrated that endurance was not about resisting change, but about flowing with it. In this sense, the wooden temple is both architecture and philosophy. The builders may not have written treatises, yet their work expressed ideas as clearly as any words. That strength is not hardness, that wisdom lies in yielding, that survival depends on harmony. When the great pagodas rose above towns and fields, they did so as reminders of these truths, their tall silhouettes visible from far away, their bells ringing softly through the air. During festivals, people gathered in their courtyards. During disasters, they sought shelter under their eaves. Thus the temples were woven into the daily fabric of life, both sacred and practical, both fragile and enduring. As time passed and Japan changed from its early kingdoms to its medieval shogunates, the temples remained, sometimes damaged, sometimes rebuilt, but always present. They became part of the collective memory of earthquakes themselves. When people recalled the great quakes of the past, they also recalled which temples had swayed and survived, which halls had sheltered the frightened, which pagodas still cast their shadows at dawn. The temples became living records of resilience, their survival a measure of history. In the modern age, when scientists study these structures, they often marvel at the precision of their joinery and the elegance of their engineering. They place sensors on the beams, shake models on testing tables, and find confirmation of what the old carpenters already knew. They see that the multiple layers of the pagoda move independently, dispersing seismic energy, that the central pillar functions as a counterbalance, that the use of seasoned cypress allows the wood to bend without breaking. But beyond the data and the diagrams, there is still something more. an intangible sense that the temples embody a way of being with the earth rather than against it. This intangible quality is perhaps why the temples continue to inspire not only engineers, but also artists, poets, and ordinary people who simply stand before them and feel their quiet presence. In their survival lies a lesson for all who live in uncertain times, that what adapts endures, that what breathes with the world lasts longer than what denies it. Even today, as Japan builds modern cities with steel and glass, the ancient wooden temples remain, visited by millions, admired for their elegance, respected for their resilience. They remind the present of the wisdom of the past, showing that in the face of trembling earth, the answer is not to harden, but to soften, not to resist, but to sway. And as you listen in the stillness of this night, you may imagine those pagodas standing tall under the stars, their tears glowing faintly in the moonlight, their beams whispering with the memory of countless tremors, their survival a quiet hymn to the art of moving with the earth. As we continue the quiet unfolding of this story, it is worth looking more closely at the materials themselves, for the survival of wooden temples through centuries of earthquakes is not only about design, but also about the choice of wood, the way it was prepared, and the care with which it was handled. Among the many trees of Japan, the cypress, known as hinoki, was the most treasured for sacred construction. Hinoki trees grew slowly in the mountain forests, straight and tall, with a fine grain that resisted decay and insects. Their scent was gentle yet enduring, filling the halls with a fragrance that lingered for centuries. Builders believed that hinoki wood carried a sacred quality, that it purified the spaces in which it stood, and so they reserved it for temples, shrines, and palaces. The beams carved from hinoki were both light and strong, able to flex under stress and return to shape, and this resilience made them ideal for withstanding earthquakes. The process of preparing the wood was itself a long ritual. Trees were carefully selected, often felled in winter when the sap was low, then left to season slowly, sometimes for many years. Piles of timber rested under open air, the sun drying them by day, the wind turning them by night, until the moisture within had balanced and the wood became stable. This patience ensured that when the beams were finally raised, they would not warp or split, but would endure the movements of earth and weather. To touch a pillar of an ancient temple is to touch wood that has been alive for centuries, first as a tree, then as part of a building, continuing its quiet life in a different form. Beyond cypress, other woods were used as well. Itarafar, with its reddish hue, provided warmth and strength. Pine offered flexibility. Each type of wood was chosen with knowledge of its properties, each placed where it would serve best. Carpenters understood the grain, the knots, the way a beam might twist under weight, and they matched each piece to its role in the larger structure. Nothing was random. Every beam, every bracket, every slat of roof tile was part of a thoughtful whole. The joinery that held these pieces together also depended on the quality of the wood. Mortise and tenon joints, dovetails, and interlocking brackets were carved with precision, relying on the natural grip of wood against wood. Over time, these joints did not weaken, but often grew tighter, as the wood swelled and settled, locking itself more firmly. In earthquakes, when the building swayed, the joints allowed movement without breaking. The flexibility of the material and the craftsmanship of the joinery combined to create a system that could endure shaking that would reduce stone walls to rubble. The importance of material selection went beyond practicality. It was also spiritual. The builders believed that the spirit of the tree lived on in the wood, and so the temple was not a lifeless object, but a living presence. The scent of hinoki reminded visitors that they were in a sacred space, where the natural world and the human world met. In this sense, the survival of temples through earthquakes was not only the survival of wood and design, but also the survival of spirit, the endurance of a relationship between people and the natural world. The temples teach us that to endure is not only to stand against force, but to live in harmony with it, to choose materials that move with the earth rather than fight it. Even in the modern world, when steel and concrete dominate, Japanese builders continue to respect the qualities of wood, drawing on traditions that are hundreds of years old. They study the old temples, learn from their beams, and apply those lessons to new structures. Thus, the story of material is not confined to the past, but flows into the present, a reminder that wisdom endures when it is rooted in careful observation and respect. As the night deepens and you rest, Imagine the quiet forest where these great trees once stood, their trunks rising high into the sky, their leaves whispering in the wind. Imagine the moment they were chosen, felled with reverence, shaped with patience, and finally raised into the beams of a temple that would stand through centuries of trembling earth. Their survival is not only a matter of architecture, but a testament to the harmony between nature and human craft. And so, the temples breathe on, their wooden bones alive with history, their scent still filling the air, their presence reminding us that even in a world of change, what is chosen with care and shaped with patience may endure beyond lifetimes. To understand more deeply how wooden temples endured the centuries of trembling earth, it is helpful to look at the rituals and symbolism that surrounded their construction, for the physical design cannot be separated from the cultural meaning. In Japan, the act of building a temple was not simply a matter of assembling wood into a structure, but a sacred process that wove spiritual beliefs into every beam and joint. Before a tree was cut from the forest, rituals were performed to honor its spirit, and prayers were offered for safe use. When the foundation was laid, ceremonies marked the beginning, acknowledging the earth beneath and asking for stability. Even the raising of the beams was accompanied by offerings, music, and chants, binding the community to the structure that would one day shelter them. These rituals were not empty gestures, but part of a worldview in which buildings were seen as living entities, connected to both earth and heaven. The Shinbashira, the central pillar of the pagoda, was often believed to be more than an architectural device. It was seen as a spiritual axis, linking the sky above to the ground below, a cosmic spine through which balance was maintained. Some legends spoke of sacred objects being buried at the base of this pillar, charms to protect the structure against calamity. The belief gave comfort to people, for when earthquakes came and the pagoda swayed but did not fall, it was not only seen as a triumph of engineering, but as proof of divine guardianship. This combination of technical knowledge and spiritual meaning created a resilience that was both physical and psychological. Communities gathered around temples not only for worship, but also for reassurance, for in their survival lay a sense of protection. The survival of temples therefore represented more than buildings. It represented continuity of belief, of identity, of a people living in harmony with a restless earth. Over the centuries, earthquakes brought devastation again and again, destroying homes and cities. Yet when survivors saw the temple still standing or rebuilt anew, they found hope. This hope was renewed generation after generation, each quake reaffirming the lesson that endurance is possible through adaptation and faith. The symbolism of impermanence was also deeply tied to the temples. In Buddhism, nothing is permanent. All things arise and pass away. To build in wood, a material that ages, darkens, and changes, was to accept impermanence while still seeking harmony. Unlike stone monuments built to defy time, Japanese temples embraced time, showing their age with dignity. Their survival through earthquakes was not denial of impermanence, but an expression of living within it. The very act of rebuilding after destruction was part of this acceptance. For a temple lost to fire or tremor could be raised again with the same care, its spirit continuing through renewal. In this way, destruction itself became part of continuity. Modern visitors who walk through temple grounds often sense this layered history. They see beams centuries old standing alongside newer reconstructions, moss growing on ancient stones, fresh wood replacing what was lost. And they realize that survival is not about never breaking, but about always continuing. The story of the temples therefore becomes a story of resilience, not only against earthquakes, but against time itself, an endurance rooted in both engineering and philosophy. The rituals of building, the reverence for wood, the belief in spiritual protection, all combined with practical knowledge to create structures that live through centuries of quakes. Today, when engineers study them, they may describe vibration damping and oscillation, but those who built them would have spoken of balance, of harmony, of respect for the forces of nature. Both languages point to the same truth, that survival comes from moving with the earth, not against it. And so, as night deepens and your eyes grow heavy, imagine standing before a tall pagoda in the quiet after an earthquake. The ground is still, the air carries the scent of hinoki, and the tower sways gently before returning to stillness. Around it, people gather, whispering prayers of thanks, feeling the reassurance of its presence. What stands before them is not only wooden joinery, but a living symbol of endurance. In that swaying, in that survival, lies a lesson for all who face uncertainty, that what yields with grace may endure with strength, and that harmony with the world brings a deeper form of safety than resistance ever could. As we drift further into this story, it is worth considering how the temples stood not only as isolated monuments, but as part of larger temple complexes and landscapes that together shaped the way people experienced earthquakes and survival. A pagoda rising above the trees was not alone, but surrounded by halls, gates, gardens, and courtyards, all arranged according to principles that balanced harmony, symmetry, and natural flow. The entire complex reflected the same philosophy that allowed the temples to endure. Nothing was fixed rigidly against the world, but set in a way that allowed space, breath, and adaptation. The great entrance gates, often built of the same seasoned timber, stood as thresholds between the outer world and the inner sacred ground. These gates too had flexible joinery and wide beams, able to sway when tremors came, so that even the entrance to the sacred space was built with the knowledge that the ground could shake. Inside, the main halls spread with broad wooden floors, supported by columns that were not driven immovably into the ground, but rested on stone bases, allowing them to shift slightly without breaking. In the gardens, paths wound gently, stones placed with care, but never cemented rigidly, water flowing in streams that could change with the seasons. Even the landscape design reflected the truth that nothing is unchanging. In times of disaster, these complexes became places of refuge. After a quake, when houses of clay and tile had collapsed, people would gather in the open courtyards, safe from falling walls, sheltered by the broad eaves of the temples. The survival of the wooden halls gave comfort, and the open grounds provided space to gather, to share food, to light fires for warmth, to mourn losses, and to find hope. Thus, the temple was more than a building. It was a community anchor, a place that remained when much else had fallen. Records from centuries past describe how, after great earthquakes, people would sleep in temple courtyards, listening to the creak of beams above, trusting that the structures would not fall. The endurance of the temples therefore shaped not only architecture, but also social life, providing continuity in times of uncertainty. Beyond Japan, travelers from other lands marveled at these wooden towers. Envoys from China and Korea brought their own traditions, often favoring heavier stone or brick structures. Yet they too admired how the Japanese temples survived the quakes that toppled other forms. Later, when Europeans arrived, they were astonished to find tall wooden buildings standing for centuries in a land where the earth never seemed to rest. Some described them as miracles, others as curiosities, yet all agreed that they were unlike anything in the West. This cross-cultural encounter highlighted the uniqueness of Japanese temple design, showing that wisdom need not always be written in books, but could be carved into wood and proven by survival. Over time, scholars began to compare the temples to living organisms. Just as a tree bends in the wind or a body absorbs shock through joints and muscles, so too did the temples bend and sway, their layers acting like vertebrae, their pillars like bones, their roofs like outstretched arms. The comparison was not only poetic but practical, for it reflected the way life itself had inspired the design. Observing nature had given the builders their lessons, and by imitating nature, they created structures that endured. Even in the modern era, this lesson has not been forgotten. Japanese engineers designing skyscrapers in Tokyo or bridges across valleys often speak of biomimicry, of learning from nature's flexibility, and when they do, they are echoing the same principles that guided the temple carpenters centuries ago. Thus, the temples are not relics of the past, but part of a living continuity that extends into the present and future. Their endurance through earthquakes is not only a story of old wood, but of timeless wisdom. To walk among such a complex today is to feel the layers of time. One sees ancient beams darkened with age, newer beams bright with recent repair, gardens that have shifted with centuries, courtyards that have sheltered countless generations. And still the pagoda rises, swaying when the ground trembles, returning to stillness when it ends. Its very presence whispers the lesson again and again that what adapts, survives. As you lie in stillness now, imagine walking through such a temple complex after dusk. Lanterns flicker in the courtyards, The scent of wood and incense lingers in the air, and the tall pagoda stands silent against the night sky. Around you, the earth may tremble, but the temple remains, breathing with the world, moving with the forces that would destroy it, enduring not by resistance, but by harmony. This quiet strength, born of wood, patience, and faith, is what has carried the temples through centuries of earthquakes, and it continues to whisper its wisdom to all who listen. As we move into the later chapters of this quiet history, it becomes clear that the story of wooden temples surviving earthquakes is not only about the distant past, but also about how these lessons have flowed into the present and influenced modern approaches to building and living in Japan. In the 20th century, Japan faced some of the most devastating earthquakes in recorded history, such as the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923, which reduced vast portions of Tokyo and Yokohama to rubble, and later the Great Hanshin earthquake of 1995, which brought destruction to Kobe and the surrounding region. In both cases, concrete and steel structures collapsed, bridges twisted apart, and fires swept through urban neighborhoods. Yet reports also noted that many ancient wooden temples swayed and shifted, but remained standing, once again serving as silent witnesses to the wisdom of the old methods. Engineers studied these survivors carefully, analyzing the way their layers moved, the role of the central pillar, and the freedom allowed by their wooden joints. What they found confirmed that the principles of flexibility and separation were as relevant as ever. In fact, these studies directly influenced modern seismic engineering. The concept of base isolation, now widely used in skyscrapers and nuclear facilities, echoes the principle of temples resting lightly on stone foundations, rather than being anchored immovably. The tuned mass dampers placed in tall buildings today, great weights that sway to counter the motion of the earth, resemble the action of the Shinbashira swaying within the pagoda. Modern Japan, with its cities of steel and glass, owes part of its safety to the lessons of ancient wood. Yet beyond the technical, the temples also continue to serve as cultural anchors in times of disaster. After the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake and the tsunami that followed, when coastal towns were swept away and the world seemed to tremble with grief, people again turned to their temples. Some temples became shelters for evacuees, others sites of prayer, others simply quiet places where survivors could rest and remember. The sight of wooden halls still standing amidst broken landscapes offered a reminder that endurance was possible, that not all was lost. This continuity of presence gave strength to communities, just as it had centuries before. The survival of temples thus has a psychological dimension as vital as the structural one. They reassure not only by remaining upright, but by symbolizing the ability to continue. In a land where earthquakes are inevitable, this reassurance is a profound comfort. Looking beyond Japan, scholars and architects worldwide have taken interest in these structures. They visit pagodas like the one at Horyuji, among the oldest wooden buildings on Earth, and marvel that it has survived since the 7th century despite countless tremors. They publish studies, build models, and share the knowledge with colleagues in earthquake-prone regions such as California, Chile, and Nepal. Thus, the wisdom of Japanese carpenters has traveled far beyond its origins, shaping global understanding of resilience. What is striking is that this wisdom arose not from formal science, but from observation, patience, and harmony with nature. The carpenters watched trees sway in storms, noted how bamboo bent without breaking, studied how mountains moved with landslides, and translated these lessons into buildings. Their science was the science of attention, their laboratory the natural world. And because they respected what they observed rather than trying to defy it, their buildings endured. Today, modern engineers equipped with advanced instruments confirm what these builders intuited centuries ago: that survival belongs to the flexible, that resistance alone is brittle, that endurance comes from adaptation. As you rest in stillness, imagine the contrast between the city streets after an earthquake: concrete blocks fallen, glass shattered, steel twisted, and a wooden pagoda still rising, its eaves wide, its beams swaying softly, its central pillar breathing with the earth. The sight is both humbling and inspiring, showing that old ways still hold truths for the modern age. The temples stand as bridges between past and present, tradition and innovation, faith and science. They whisper the same lesson to each generation: to endure, move with the world rather than against it. In this way, they are not only relics of history, but guides for the future. As we reach the final part of this long and gentle journey, it is fitting to reflect not only on the structures themselves, but on the enduring message they leave for us today. Wooden temples in Japan have stood for over 1,000 years, through countless earthquakes, storms, fires, and wars. And their survival is not merely a matter of chance, but the result of patience, wisdom, and harmony with nature. When one looks closely at a pagoda, it is easy to see the engineering brilliance. The central pillar swaying like a pendulum, the layers moving independently, the wide eaves dispersing energy, the joinery allowing flex instead of fracture. Yet to focus only on mechanics is to miss the deeper truth, for these temples were not built as machines, but as living embodiments of a philosophy that embraced impermanence and change. In their very design, they carry a lesson: that life is uncertain, that the ground may shift, that nothing is fixed forever, and that survival is found not in denial of this truth, but in acceptance of it. This philosophy, woven into wood and space, has carried people through centuries of tremors. After each great quake, when the dust settled and the ruins were counted, the sight of temples still standing gave courage to survivors. They gathered in the courtyards, lit incense, and prayed, not only to the deities enshrined within, but also in gratitude for the endurance of the structures themselves. The temples became symbols of hope, their survival a reminder that even in destruction, something can remain. This reassurance was passed from one generation to the next, so that today, when visitors walk among ancient pagodas, they are not only looking at architecture, but also at history's memory of resilience. Modern engineers continue to draw inspiration from these buildings. Skyscrapers in Tokyo are now built with seismic dampers, base isolators, and flexible cores that echo the principles of the wooden pagodas. In this way, the past lives on in the present, not as nostalgia, but as active guidance. The old temples whisper to modern cities, move with the earth, not against it. And as long as this lesson is remembered, the future will carry forward their wisdom. The temples also remind us of the bond between humans and nature. Every beam of hinoki once grew in a forest. Every pillar once rose as a tree. Every fragrance of cypress that fills a hall is the scent of the natural world made sacred. To step inside such a temple is to feel that connection, to be reminded that endurance is not about separating ourselves from the earth, but about living in rhythm with it. Perhaps this is why the temples feel alive, why their survival through earthquakes is more than structural. It is symbolic, a quiet assurance that harmony creates strength. As centuries pass, they continue to stand, not as defiance of impermanence, but as acceptance of it. And in that acceptance lies peace. For those who come to them, whether as pilgrims, tourists, or weary survivors of disaster, the temples offer stillness. They show that while the world trembles, one can remain. They show that while change is inevitable, continuity is possible. They show that even in fragility, there is strength. And so, as our story comes to its close, imagine standing before an ancient pagoda under the moonlight. The earth is quiet for now, but even if it should shake, you know the tower will sway and settle, just as it has for 1,000 years. Its beams will breathe, its layers will shift, its pillar will swing. And when the tremor ends, it will still be there, calm against the sky. This is the gift of the wooden temples of Japan. Not the promise that nothing will ever break, but the wisdom that even when the earth moves, we can endure by moving with it. It is a lesson written not in words but in wood, carried across generations, offered to all who are willing to see. And as you drift now into rest, may you carry with you the quiet assurance of their survival, the calm of their presence, and the gentle strength of their wisdom. That is the end of our story for tonight. Before we move on, if you enjoyed this journey, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe. It truly helps us continue bringing you more calm stories. Now, let us drift quietly into the next tale in our Boring History for Sleep series. Tonight, we arrive at a new chapter: the towns that grew around castles. Long ago, when castles began to rise across the landscapes of medieval Japan, they were never built as isolated structures alone, but as anchors around which entire communities slowly formed. The castle was more than a fortress of stone and wood. It was a symbol of authority, a place of defense, and at the same time the heart of a growing town. To understand how towns grew around castles, One must imagine the world of the 16th and 17th centuries, when Japan was divided into provinces ruled by powerful lords known as daimyo. These lords sought to protect their domains, control the flow of trade, and display their strength. A castle provided all of these functions, rising high on stone bases, its towers visible for miles, its walls enclosing halls, armories, and residences. But the castle did not stand alone for long. Around it, people gathered. First came the samurai, warriors loyal to the daimyo, who built their homes within or just beyond the castle walls. Then came merchants, artisans, and farmers, who saw safety in the castle's shadow and opportunity in the flow of people. Over time, what began as scattered dwellings became organized streets, bustling markets, and neighborhoods, forming what came to be known as castle towns, or jokamachi. These towns were shaped carefully by design. Streets were often laid out in patterns that reflected both defense and order. Narrow lanes twisted to confuse potential invaders, while wide avenues led directly to the castle gates, emphasizing its centrality. Samurai districts were placed close to the castle, their houses neat and orderly, while merchant and artisan quarters extended outward, forming the living arteries of commerce. Farmers often lived on the edges, bringing food from the countryside into the town's markets. In this way, each town reflected both hierarchy and cooperation, with the castle at its core and the people arrayed around it in layers of function and status. The growth of these towns also changed the rhythms of daily life. Markets emerged at regular intervals, drawing villagers from surrounding lands. Inns were built to house travelers, and tea houses offered rest to weary merchants. Blacksmiths forged tools, carpenters shaped wood, potters fired clay, and weavers produced cloth, all supporting both the castle and the people who lived nearby. Over time, some of these castle towns grew into cities that still exist today, their origins traceable to the stone bases and moats of old fortresses. The presence of a castle brought both security and opportunity, but it also brought rules. Daimyo controlled the movement of people, regulated trade, and taxed goods. Streets were patrolled and curfews kept order. Life in a castle town was thus both vibrant and disciplined, a balance of freedom and control. Yet despite these restrictions, people thrived. For where there was a castle, there was demand, and where there was demand, there was livelihood. The castle drew people like a mountain draws rivers, channeling the flow of life into patterns that lasted for centuries. The structure itself was both a beacon and a shield, its tall white walls gleaming in the sun, its layered roofs curving upward like wings, its watchtowers keeping vigil over the town below. In the mornings, smoke rose from kitchen fires across the town, blending with the mist around the moat. Merchants opened shutters, farmers unloaded carts, children ran along narrow alleys, and above it all the castle stood, silent but commanding, a presence that shaped the lives of all who dwelled in its shadow. To walk through such a town was to see the intertwining of power and community, defense and livelihood, authority and adaptation. It is in these castle towns that one can see how architecture not only protected people, but also created spaces where society itself could grow. And as centuries passed, even when castles lost their military purpose, the towns they fostered remained, carrying their patterns into modern streets, their marketplaces into modern commerce, their traditions into the present. When we look more closely at the towns that grew around castles in Japan, we find that their design was never accidental, but carefully planned to serve both the practical needs of defense and the daily rhythms of life. A castle was a stronghold, but it was also a stage on which the relationships between rulers and the ruled were expressed in physical space. The daimyo who commanded the castle wanted not only to live in safety, but also to project power, and the layout of the surrounding town reflected this dual purpose. At the very center stood the castle itself, often perched on a rise of land, or an artificial hill with stone walls rising in tiers and moats encircling the base. From this high point, the lord could look out across the land, seeing both the rice fields that fed his people and the homes that clustered under his protection. Closest to the castle lived the samurai retainers, their houses arranged in neat rows that reflected their rank and responsibility. The most trusted vassals lived nearest to the gates, while lower-ranked warriors were placed further away. These districts were not only places to live, but also part of the defense system. for in times of attack, the samurai could rally quickly to protect the castle. Beyond the samurai quarters stretched the merchant and artisan districts, where daily life thrived. Here, the narrow streets bustled with activity. Rice dealers, sake brewers, cloth merchants, and tool makers filled wooden shops, their shutters opening each morning to reveal goods displayed on simple stands. Blacksmiths hammered iron, potters turned clay, and carpenters cut wood, each contributing to the livelihood of the town and the needs of the castle. The markets were lively, but also regulated, for the daimyo's officials set rules about prices, weights, and taxes. Still, within these boundaries, trade flourished, for the presence of the castle created constant demand. Farmers from the countryside brought produce, fish from nearby rivers and coasts arrived fresh each morning, and traders carried goods from other provinces, their journeys ending at the bustling gates of the castle town. At the edges of the settlement lived the farmers who could not fit within the main streets, and beyond them stretched the fields that sustained the entire population. These farmers came into town on market days, their carts loaded with rice, vegetables, and firewood, their presence tying the agricultural world to the urban. Thus, the castle town was a microcosm of the larger domain, uniting warriors, merchants, artisans, and farmers in a single living network. Defense was never forgotten in these designs. Streets were sometimes laid out in crooked patterns, not for confusion alone, but to slow invading forces. High earthen walls and canals protected the outer districts, while watchtowers rose at strategic points. Even the placement of bridges was deliberate, forcing traffic through controlled gates where guards could observe all who entered. The castle was the heart, but the town was its body, each part serving a function, each layer contributing to strength. Life in such towns was disciplined, yet not without joy. Festivals filled the streets with color, processions carried shrines through alleys, and performers entertained crowds. Temples and shrines nestled within districts, giving space for prayer and ritual. The hum of daily commerce was joined by the laughter of children and the chatter of neighbors, reminding all that though the castle symbolized authority, the town was a place of shared life. Over time, these towns became enduring centers, many evolving into the modern cities we know today. Osaka, Kanazawa, Nagoya, and many others began as castle towns, their street patterns still bearing traces of their origins. In walking those streets now, one can still sense the old logic, the way markets clustered, the way samurai houses lined broad avenues, the way narrow lanes curved to protect the heart of the town. The legacy of the castle town is thus not only in stone walls and moats, but in the very shape of Japanese urban life. As night settles in your imagination, picture such a town centuries ago. The glow of lanterns in shop fronts, the sound of merchants closing shutters, the clatter of hooves as a messenger rides through the gate, the steady silhouette of the castle above, watching silently. It was within these rhythms of work, defense, and community that the towns grew, surviving centuries of change, their spirit still present in the modern landscapes that evolved from them. As the castle towns of Japan developed further, they began to take on unique characteristics that reflected not only the presence of the castle itself, but also the influence of the daimyo who ruled them and the needs of the people who lived within their walls. Each castle town was shaped by a mixture of practical defense, economic growth, and cultural life. And though they shared common features, no two were exactly the same. The daimyo's castle was always the visual and symbolic center, but the town around it revealed the personality and policies of its lord. Some lords encouraged trade and opened their towns to merchants from faraway provinces, while others imposed strict controls to maintain order and limit outside influence. The placement of districts within the town often reflected these policies. Samurai quarters were always closest to the castle, their neat rows of residences a sign of hierarchy, but the merchant quarters varied. In certain towns, markets spread along broad streets that led to the castle gates, displaying wealth and activity, while in others they were tucked into narrow alleys, their vibrancy kept at a distance. The artisan quarters, filled with blacksmiths, weavers, potters, and carpenters, were the beating heart of daily life, for their work sustained the entire community. Beyond these lay the temples and shrines, places where people gathered to pray for protection, prosperity, and peace. These sacred spaces offered not only religious comfort, but also reinforced the authority of the daimyo, for they symbolized the divine approval of his rule. Together, castle, town, and temple formed a triangle of power, community, and belief. Defense continued to shape the physical design. Streets were curved deliberately, bridges were angled, and gates were positioned so that invading forces would be slowed or forced to reveal themselves. Moats surrounded both the castle and sometimes parts of the town, creating layers of separation that protected the core. Earthen walls lined certain districts, and watchtowers allowed guards to observe comings and goings. The architecture of defense became the architecture of daily life, shaping the movement of people as much as the strategies of war. Yet despite these strictures, life in castle towns was vibrant. Markets bustled with activity, with stalls offering rice, fish, vegetables, textiles, and tools. On festival days, the streets came alive with music, colorful banners, and processions that wound their way through neighborhoods. Performers entertained, storytellers recited tales of heroes and legends, and children played among the alleys. For the people who lived there, the castle was both a reminder of authority and the reason their town existed at all. Its presence created opportunity, even as it enforced discipline. The towns grew steadily, and in time many became centers of regional identity. Towns such as Kanazawa, Himeji, and Matsumoto still show traces of their castle origins, their modern streets following the patterns laid down centuries earlier. Walking through them today is to glimpse the outlines of a world where hierarchy and community blended, where the authority of a lord was visible in every stone wall and every ordered street. Over time, as peace was established under the Tokugawa shogunate, the military purpose of castles declined, but their towns continued to flourish. Trade expanded, artisans gained recognition, and towns became centers of culture as well as defense. Kabuki theaters appeared, tea houses served travelers, and schools taught children of samurai and commoners alike. The castle remained as a symbol, but the town became the true heart of daily life. To imagine such a place at dusk is to see lanterns glowing in the windows of merchants, the clatter of shutters closing, the sound of footsteps echoing on stone streets, and above it all, the castle standing quietly in the background, its watchtowers silhouetted against the fading light. Life moved forward in the shadow of the fortress, weaving together defense, economy, culture, and community. And as centuries passed, these towns left behind not only stone and wood, but also patterns of life that endure in modern Japan. As castle towns matured, they became more than centers of defense and trade. They developed into cultural landscapes where social order, architecture, and daily life were carefully interwoven. The daimyo who ruled from the castle not only managed armies and taxes, but also shaped the growth of arts, rituals, and education within the town. Each castle town reflected the power of its lord, and the prosperity of the people often mirrored his policies. Within the inner districts, samurai lived with their families in houses arranged by rank, the higher officials closer to the castle, their gardens larger, their gates taller, their walls thicker. These homes were not only dwellings but also statements of duty and honor. The samurai were expected to embody loyalty and discipline, and their orderly neighborhoods reflected these values. Beyond them, the merchant and artisan districts buzzed with life, their homes often doubling as shops where the front rooms opened onto the street. Here, goods were displayed behind sliding shutters, and the sounds of trade filled the air. Buyers and sellers haggled quietly over rice, cloth, sake, and tools, while apprentices carried supplies from workshops, where carpenters shaped beams, dyers colored fabrics, and smiths hammered iron. The edges of the town held the farmers' houses, small and simple, but tied to the larger community by the food they supplied and the markets they joined. These patterns created a living circle of hierarchy and interdependence, with the castle at the center as the ultimate symbol of order. The physical layout of these towns also reflected this order. Streets curved deliberately to slow enemies, yet they also created a sense of discovery for those who lived there, each bend revealing another row of homes, another shrine, another market. Bridges crossed moats with angles designed to make cavalry pause, yet to ordinary townspeople they were simply daily crossings, part of the rhythm of life. Watchtowers rose over gates, their guards vigilant, but to children, they were landmarks for play and meeting points at the end of alleys. The architecture of defense and the architecture of life coexisted, each shaping the other. Cultural life flourished in these environments. The presence of a castle drew not only warriors and merchants, but also teachers, performers, and artists. Kabuki theaters appeared, where actors in painted masks and elaborate costumes told stories of heroes, tragedies, and comic mishaps. Tea houses opened to travelers, offering rest and conversation. Festivals filled the streets with music, lanterns, and parades, giving the people moments of joy that balanced the discipline of their daily lives. Temples and shrines within the town gave spiritual rhythm, marking the seasons with rituals that brought the community together. Education also grew under the watchful eyes of the daimyo. Schools for samurai children taught reading, calligraphy, and the codes of conduct expected of warriors. Some towns also offered schooling for commoners, spreading literacy and knowledge of trade. Over time, these castle towns became seeds of cultural development, not only centers of authority, but also guardians of tradition and creativity. The legacy of these towns is still visible in modern Japan. Cities like Kanazawa, Matsumoto, and Himeji retain districts where the layout echoes the castle town pattern, where narrow alleys bend unexpectedly and old merchant houses remain with wooden facades and tiled roofs. Even in modern Osaka and Nagoya, the original castles mark the heart of the city, their moats and walls preserved as reminders of origins. The urban landscapes of Japan are therefore layered with history, their modern bustle built on the foundations of castle towns. To imagine life there centuries ago is to see a world both disciplined and vibrant. The clang of a blacksmith at dawn, the quiet hum of merchants opening shutters, the steady presence of samurai passing along broad avenues, and above it all the castle looming silently, both protector and master. In these rhythms of life, we can understand how the towns grew not only around castles, but because of them, and how they endured even when the castles themselves lost their military purpose. The castle towns were living organisms, evolving with time, yet always carrying the imprint of the fortress at their core. As the centuries passed, castle towns did not remain static, but grew and adapted to the shifting tides of Japanese history, reflecting the political stability of the Tokugawa shogunate and the gradual transformation of society during the long period of peace known as the Edo era. With fewer wars to fight, castles shifted from being fortresses of conflict to centers of administration and governance, and the towns that surrounded them blossomed into vibrant hubs of commerce and culture. The samurai, who once lived by the sword, now found themselves increasingly tasked with bureaucratic duties, their homes still neatly arranged by rank, but their lives devoted to service in writing, accounting, and record-keeping rather than constant military campaigns. Merchants and artisans, once seen as lower in status, grew more important in this new environment, for the demand for goods, clothing, and entertainment expanded as peace encouraged prosperity. Markets thrived, festivals multiplied, and the towns took on a liveliness that might have seemed unimaginable in earlier centuries of war. The layout of castle towns also evolved to reflect these changes. While defense remained a consideration, the long peace meant that twisting streets and hidden gates were less about preparing for enemy attacks, and more about shaping the daily flow of people. Main avenues leading to castle gates became crowded with shops, tea houses, and stalls, drawing both townspeople and travelers. Inns flourished, serving merchants from distant provinces who brought rice, silk, salt, paper, and countless other goods to trade. The once rigid hierarchy of space softened slightly as commoners moved closer to areas of commerce and towns expanded beyond their original moats and walls. Still, the sense of order imposed by the daimyo remained visible, reminding all who lived there of the authority at the town's core. Religious and cultural life intertwined with this prosperity. Temples and shrines stood not only as places of worship, but as guardians of the town's rhythm, marking seasonal changes with rituals and festivals that brought the community together. The sound of temple bells carried through the narrow alleys at dawn, while processions filled the streets in the evenings of summer, lanterns glowing against the darkening sky in theaters. Kabuki performances drew audiences of samurai and commoners alike, their stories reflecting the joys, sorrows, and humor of everyday life. Schools spread, teaching literacy to children of merchants and artisans, and even the farmers who came to town for markets found themselves drawn into the cultural pulse of these growing centers. Over time, castle towns became not only places of administration and trade, but also symbols of regional pride. Each town carried its own identity, shaped by the history of its daimyo, the style of its castle, and the particular crafts that thrived within its walls. Kanazawa became known for gold leaf and lacquerware, while towns like Himeji were celebrated for their castle's grandeur, drawing admiration that extended far beyond their gates. Travelers recorded their impressions, noting how these towns were both orderly and lively, disciplined yet full of color, their daily routines framed by the constant silhouette of the castle. Even as Japan began to open slowly to the wider world in the 19th century, many castle towns remained rooted in their traditions, their patterns of life unchanged, their streets carrying the same curves, their districts still echoing the logic of hierarchy and community. When modernization arrived with the Meiji Restoration, some castles were torn down or repurposed, their military role obsolete, yet the towns endured, their foundations too deeply set in the lives of the people to disappear. In fact, many of today's Japanese cities still reveal the traces of their origins in castle towns, their main avenues following ancient lines, their districts named for samurai or merchant quarters long gone, their moats preserved as parks and waterways. To reflect on these towns is to see how power, community, and culture intermingled across centuries, and how the presence of a single castle could shape not only the defense of a land, but the growth of a living society. And as night falls in your imagination, you may picture one of these towns in the height of the Edo period, the castle glowing softly in the moonlight, the streets alive with the fading sounds of merchants closing their shutters, the quiet laughter of neighbors lingering in alleyways, the fragrance of incense drifting from temple courtyards, and the steady rhythm of life continuing in the shadow of the fortress that had given the town its form and its soul. As the long peace of the Edo period continued, the castle towns of Japan became deeply embedded in the cultural and economic fabric of the nation, transforming from military outposts into complex urban environments where class, commerce, and culture met under the ever-watchful presence of the castle. These towns developed intricate rhythms that defined daily life, and though they were highly ordered, they were also dynamic spaces filled with activity and growth. The samurai, positioned closest to the castle, lived in homes that reflected their rank, each household with a gate, a garden, and a modest but dignified residence. Their role shifted more and more from warriors to administrators, and the sword became a symbol of duty rather than an everyday tool of war. Samurai families practiced calligraphy, poetry, and etiquette, raising children who would one day serve in offices rather than on battlefields. Their neighborhoods were quiet, orderly, and marked by discipline, the broad avenues that ran through them reflecting both prestige and control. Beyond the samurai quarters, the merchant districts were livelier and noisier, alive with the sound of shutters opening at dawn and traders calling out their goods. Shops lined the main streets, selling rice, sake, textiles, salt, paper, lacquerware, and countless everyday necessities. Artisans worked in backrooms or small workshops, hammering metal, dyeing fabrics, or shaping clay, their skills passed down through generations. These quarters smelled of wood, smoke, and fresh produce, the scents mixing with the laughter of children and the voices of buyers haggling over prices. Farmers from the surrounding countryside entered the town with carts piled high with vegetables and firewood, their presence tying the agricultural world to the castle's urban heart. Inns and tea houses lined the main avenues, catering to travelers, merchants, and pilgrims. Here, weary visitors found rest, food, and companionship, their stories and news adding to the hum of the town. Entertainment flourished as well, with kabuki theaters staging colorful performances, storytellers gathering small crowds in alleys, and festivals filling the streets with music, lanterns, and processions. Castle towns became places where culture thrived, the influence of the daimyo visible not only in administration, but also in sponsorship of arts and learning. Temples and shrines offered balance to this activity, their bells marking the hours, their grounds hosting seasonal rituals that brought communities together. They reminded people that life was not only about trade or duty, but also about prayer, reflection, and continuity. Education spread through castle towns, with schools teaching literacy, mathematics, and moral codes, shaping the next generation of both samurai and commoners. This gradual rise of literacy created a more connected society, one where printed books and woodblock prints circulated, carrying news, stories, and knowledge through the castle towns and beyond. The castle itself remained the visual and symbolic core. Its white plaster walls and tiled roofs gleamed in the sun, its towers standing tall above the surrounding houses, its moats reflecting the light of lanterns at dusk. Even as its military role waned, it remained a constant reminder of authority, a presence that defined the town's identity. To walk through such a town at twilight was to feel the layers of this life. The silence of samurai quarters, the bustle of merchants closing their shops, the aroma of evening meals drifting from kitchens, the sound of laughter as children played in narrow alleys, and above it all, the steady, unmoving castle, watching over the people who lived in its shadow. Over time, these rhythms became traditions, and even as Japan began to change in the 19th century, the structure of castle towns continued to shape urban life. The legacy of these towns lives on today in modern cities, where streets still curve unexpectedly, where moats have become parks, and where castles, rebuilt or preserved, stand as reminders of origins. The towns that grew around castles were more than communities. They were reflections of an entire way of life, and their memory endures not only in history books, but in the very shape of Japanese cities. As the Edo period stretched across 2.5 centuries, the castle towns of Japan became some of the most distinctive features of the country's landscape, each of them a reflection of political power, cultural life, and human adaptation. They were not merely clusters of houses gathered near fortresses, but carefully organized communities that balanced hierarchy with livelihood, order with vibrancy, tradition with adaptation. Each castle stood as the nucleus of authority, and around it the town spread outward like ripples in a pond, the placement of every district calculated to reinforce both protection and structure. Samurai homes lined the streets nearest the castle walls, their rows straight and uniform, reflecting their disciplined role as servants of the daimyo. Beyond them, the merchants and artisans lived and worked, their streets alive with chatter, the smell of food cooking, the clatter of tools in workshops, and the creak of wooden carts carrying goods. The farmers formed the outermost ring, coming in and out with produce that sustained the town's life. These circles of community created a living diagram of society, visible in stone, wood, and path. Festivals punctuated this order with bursts of color and sound. Throughout the year, towns celebrated seasonal changes with parades, processions, and fireworks. Merchants decorated their shops with banners, children ran laughing with paper lanterns, and musicians filled the streets with flutes and drums. These moments of celebration did not erase hierarchy, but softened it, reminding everyone that beneath the structure of duty, there was joy and shared experience. Religious life was also deeply woven into the castle towns. Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines offered spaces for prayer and contemplation, their bells echoing across rooftops in the early morning, their incense drifting through narrow lanes. These sacred places acted as anchors of continuity, assuring people that beyond the authority of the daimyo, there was also the enduring presence of tradition and faith. Schools established within towns taught the children of samurai to read, write, and master the codes of behavior expected of them, while commoners gained access to basic education through temple schools. Literacy spread, and with it a new flow of ideas carried in books and prints. This cultural life added yet another dimension to the towns, making them not only centers of defense and commerce, but also guardians of knowledge. Travel between castle towns became more frequent as trade routes developed. Inns flourished along main streets, welcoming travelers who brought news from other regions, their voices weaving distant places into the local fabric. Merchants carried lacquerware, ceramics, textiles, and other crafts from one castle town to another, ensuring that each community was not isolated but part of a greater network. Over time, castle towns became interlinked, forming the backbone of Japan's regional economy. Yet always, at the heart of each town, the castle stood. Its silhouette dominated the skyline, its watchtowers and walls casting long shadows over the surrounding houses. In the evening, when lanterns glowed in shop fronts and the noise of the markets faded, the castle remained a silent presence, reminding everyone of the order that underpinned their daily lives. Though battles became rare during the long peace, the castle still symbolized strength, discipline, and authority. It shaped the rhythms of the town, even when its gates no longer prepared for war. To imagine such a town at night is to see layers of life settling into rest. The samurai quarters quiet, the merchant streets dimming after a day of trade, the farmers returning to their homes at the edges, the shrines and temples lit softly by candles, and above it all the castle, timeless and unmoving, its reflection trembling in the water of the moat as the wind stirs. These towns were not only practical creations, but living testaments to the way human societies organize themselves around symbols of power and safety, and their legacy continues to influence the cities that grew from them. As castle towns continued to thrive under the stability of the Edo period, they became more than functional centers of governance and defense. They grew into cultural landscapes where architecture, community, and economy blended into patterns that would influence Japan for centuries to come. The presence of a castle meant more than military strength. It meant that a town would flourish in its shadow, shaped by the flow of trade, the organization of society, and the rituals of daily life. These towns were deliberately structured, their design carefully aligned with the authority of the daimyo. Streets closest to the castle housed the samurai, whose homes reflected rank and order with neatly lined walls and gates that mirrored their disciplined role. The next ring of life belonged to merchants and artisans, who brought noise, energy, and the movement of goods to the heart of the town. Workshops hammered with the sound of metal, kilns glowed as potters shaped clay, and looms creaked as cloth was woven. Shops opened their shutters each morning to reveal rice, sake, lacquerware, and endless varieties of tools and clothing, their voices filling the air with calls to customers. Beyond this hub of activity stretched the homes of farmers and laborers, their carts carrying food and firewood into the markets that sustained both castle and community. These patterns created a living balance, each layer dependent on the others, each tied to the central presence of the fortress. Cultural life thrived in these towns as much as commerce. Kabuki theaters offered stories of love, tragedy, and heroism, drawing crowds from all walks of life. Tea houses served as places for travelers to rest, for merchants to exchange news, and for neighbors to share conversation. Festivals filled the streets with music, banners, and lanterns, their colors and sounds softening the rigid order imposed by the castle's authority. The temples and shrines scattered throughout the town added another rhythm, their bells ringing in the morning, their incense curling into the air, marking time with rituals that bound the community together. Education also spread through these towns, with schools for the children of samurai teaching literacy, mathematics, and etiquette, while temple schools gave commoners the chance to learn reading and writing. This spread of knowledge contributed to a growing culture of books and prints, with illustrated stories and practical manuals circulating in the markets, enriching the minds of townspeople and linking them to a wider world of thought. Trade routes expanded, connecting one castle town to another. Roads filled with merchants, pack horses, and travelers, and inns along the way welcomed them with rest and food. These connections ensured that the towns were not isolated, but part of a greater network of commerce and culture. Goods from one region, paper, ceramics, silk, or tools, could be found in markets hundreds of miles away, carried along routes that tied the nation together. Over time, some castle towns became famous for their specialties, gaining reputations that lasted long after the feudal system itself faded. Throughout all this growth, the castle remained the constant presence. Its silhouette dominated the skyline, its stone walls and high towers reflecting sunlight by day and lantern light by night. Even as warfare became rare, the castle symbolized the authority that shaped every aspect of life. For the townspeople, it was a reminder of both protection and control, a silent overseer that defined their world. Yet it was also a source of pride, for the beauty of castles like Himeji or Matsumoto inspired admiration that extended beyond their military role. To picture such a town in the quiet of evening is to see merchants closing their shutters, farmers returning from the markets, samurai walking calmly through their quarters, children playing in the fading light, and above it all the castle, unmoving, eternal in appearance, a beacon of authority and identity. These towns were more than the sum of their districts. They were living organisms, breathing with the rhythm of commerce, culture, and tradition. Their form guided by stone walls and wooden beams, but their life created by the people who filled their streets. Their legacy endures, for modern Japanese cities still carry traces of these origins, their streets bending where once moats curved, their names recalling the samurai or merchant quarters that defined them. their castles preserved as reminders of a time when towns grew in the shadow of power. As the years of peace and stability continued, castle towns evolved into some of the most sophisticated urban centers of early modern Japan, each shaped by the presence of the fortress at its heart, but gradually developing a life and identity of its own. The castle was still the anchor, its walls and moats dominating the skyline, but the town that spread around it grew increasingly complex, reflecting the changing balance of authority, commerce, and culture. The samurai quarters remained nearest to the castle, their rows of houses lined by walls and gardens that conveyed order and hierarchy. Yet even here, the roles of the warriors shifted further away from battle and toward administration. Samurai were often engaged in bureaucratic tasks, record-keeping, or teaching, their swords worn as symbols of status, while their daily lives were filled with paperwork and service to their lord's government. The merchant and artisan districts, meanwhile, grew ever more vibrant. The streets bustled from dawn to dusk, with the sound of shutters opening, the calls of vendors, and the rhythmic hammering of craftsmen at work. Sake brewers sent the scent of fermenting rice into the air, dyers filled buckets with vivid colors that stained cloth, and potters stacked kilns with bowls and jars destined for kitchens across the region. Food stalls offered steaming noodles, grilled fish, and rice cakes, while traveling entertainers moved through the streets, bringing moments of laughter and diversion to the townspeople. Farmers arrived from the countryside with carts laden with rice, vegetables, and firewood, their goods traded in busy markets that kept the entire population supplied. Over time, castle towns became crucial nodes in wider networks of trade. Roads and rivers connected them to other towns, and goods flowed across provinces, ensuring that a lacquered box from one domain might be sold in the markets of another hundreds of miles away. Inns and tea houses welcomed these travelers, filling the towns with stories, news, and cultural exchange. Each town began to acquire its own reputation for particular crafts or specialties: Kanazawa for its gold leaf, Kyoto for its textiles, Edo for its bustling markets, and these reputations added to their prestige. Culture flourished alongside commerce. Kabuki theaters attracted large audiences, telling tales of tragedy, romance, and satire that spoke to the hopes and sorrows of both samurai and commoners. Woodblock prints depicted the streets, the shops, and the festivals, creating images that carried the identity of each town far beyond its borders. Schools taught not only reading and writing, but also moral codes, etiquette, and the practical skills needed to sustain the community. Temples and shrines remained ever present, their bells marking the passage of time, their rituals anchoring the seasons, their courtyards serving as places of both worship and gathering. Festivals filled the streets with color and sound, lanterns glowing in the night, processions winding past merchant stalls, and drums echoing against the castle walls. These celebrations gave rhythm to the year and balance to the strict order of daily life, reminding townspeople that joy and community could flourish even under the shadow of authority. Yet even as these towns grew rich and lively, the castles themselves began to lose their original military role. Under the Tokugawa shogunate, warfare between domains was forbidden, and so the mighty fortresses that had once bristled with weapons became more symbolic than practical. Their moats still held water, their walls still loomed high, their watchtowers still looked out across the land, but they served more as reminders of power than as defenses against invasion. Still, they shaped the towns around them, for their presence commanded loyalty, defined status, and offered a shared identity. To walk through a castle town in these years was to encounter the layers of a society at once highly structured and richly alive. The samurai quarters quiet and disciplined, the merchant streets filled with energy, the artisan workshops glowing with fire and activity, the farmers bringing life from the fields, the shrines and temples whispering prayers into the air, and above it all, the castle, timeless and still, both master and symbol. Even today, when many castles have vanished or been rebuilt, the towns they once anchored continue to carry the imprint of this structure, their streets bending with the logic of defense, their names recalling samurai or merchant districts, their markets buzzing with the echoes of centuries. The legacy of castle towns lives on, not only in ruins or preserved castles, but in the very shape of Japan's cities. As we bring this long journey through castle towns to a close, it is worth pausing to reflect on what their story truly represents, for these were not just towns built in the shadow of fortresses, but living expressions of a society shaped by authority, hierarchy, and adaptation. The castles themselves stood as guardians of power, their walls of stone and wood rising high above the fields, their watchtowers surveying the land for miles, their moats shimmering in the sunlight or reflecting lanterns in the quiet of evening. Yet their survival was not what defined history, as much as the life that flourished around them. The towns that grew in their orbit became the true centers of culture, commerce, and community. Within their gates, generations of families were born, worked, and died, their lives bound by the rhythms of markets, rituals, and festivals. Samurai lived in disciplined rows of houses, embodying loyalty and order, their role shifting from warriors to administrators as peace endured. Merchants filled the streets with goods, their shops offering rice, silk, lacquerware, and countless necessities. Artisans shaped wood, iron, and clay into tools, vessels, and ornaments, their skills weaving the fabric of daily existence. Farmers arrived from the countryside with produce that fed the entire population, their carts rumbling through the gates at dawn. These rhythms created a balance that defined the towns as much as the castles at their heart. Over time, these towns became more than reflections of authority. They grew into places of identity. Each castle town developed its own character, shaped by the crafts it specialized in, the festivals it celebrated, and the traditions it preserved. Some became famous for gold leaf, others for textiles, ceramics, or theater. Their reputations spread far and wide, ensuring that their legacy outlived even the military purpose of their castles. When the Tokugawa shogunate enforced peace, castles lost their role as fortresses of war, yet the towns around them continued to flourish, proving that they had become more than defensive outposts. They had become cultural hearts that carried Japan through centuries of change. Even in the modern era, after the fall of the shogunate and the sweeping changes of the Meiji Restoration, the traces of these towns endured. Some castles were torn down, their stones scattered, their moats drained, yet the towns that grew around them remained. Streets followed the old patterns, bending where defensive logic once dictated. Names recalled the samurai quarters or merchant districts of long ago, and moats were transformed into parks where people strolled under cherry blossoms. In cities such as Kanazawa, Matsumoto, Himeji, and Osaka, the presence of the castle remains visible, either in preserved structures or reconstructed towers that stand as reminders of origins. Even where castles vanished completely, their memory is etched into the very shape of the urban landscape. The castle towns remind us that history is not only written in battles or decrees, but also in the quiet persistence of daily life. The hum of markets, the ringing of temple bells, the laughter of children in narrow lanes, the glow of lanterns in evening streets, all of these created the real life of the town, enduring far beyond the authority of any single daimyo. To imagine such a town at night is to see layers of centuries blended into one: the quiet order of samurai quarters, the vibrant pulse of merchant districts, the scent of food rising from kitchens, the distant sound of music from a festival, and above it all, the castle, glowing faintly against the sky, timeless and silent. The towns that grew around castles were more than places of defense. They were living organisms, adapting, evolving, and carrying forward the spirit of Japan's history. Their legacy is still visible today, not only in the castles that remain, but in the cities that bear their imprint. To walk through a modern Japanese city is often to walk along streets once traced by castle moats, to see neighborhoods shaped by centuries-old patterns, to feel the presence of history beneath the modern noise. And so the story of castle towns is a story of continuity, of how places once born from the logic of war grew into the lifeblood of peace, and how their memory continues to shape the land. As you let this story settle into quiet thought, imagine yourself standing before a castle town long ago, the fortress rising above, the town alive below, and the rhythms of life flowing steadily forward. Even as centuries pass, the echo of these towns endures, reminding us that history is not only about what was built, but also about how people lived around it, shaping communities that lasted far beyond the age of castles themselves. That is the end of our story. Before we move on, if you are enjoying these calm journeys, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe. It truly helps us continue. And now, let us drift into the next tale in our Boring History for Sleep series. Tonight, we begin a new chapter, the long story behind cobblestone streets. The story of cobblestone streets is not a short one, for these simple stones laid underfoot carry with them centuries of human history, effort, and continuity. To walk on cobblestones today is to touch the surface of the past, to feel beneath your steps the same texture that countless generations have felt before. The origin of cobblestone paving can be traced to some of the earliest settlements in Europe and Asia, where people first sought ways to make their paths more durable than bare soil. In ancient villages, rain and carts quickly turned dirt tracks into muddy ruts, impassable during storms, and so people began placing rounded stones collected from riverbeds into the ground. These stones, smoothed by water and time, were durable, and when packed tightly together, they created a surface that resisted erosion. Thus, the earliest cobblestones were not cut by human hands, but shaped by nature, chosen for their roundness and strength, and carried into use by communities that needed roads to last. As civilizations expanded, so did the use of cobblestones. The Romans, famed for their roads, often used large flat paving stones for their main highways. But in many towns and villages, smaller cobbles filled the streets, offering both durability and a method of controlling water flow. A well-laid cobblestone street could channel rainwater toward drains, keeping the road usable in all weather. Over centuries, the technique spread widely, and by the Middle Ages, cobblestone streets had become a defining feature of towns across Europe. Walking down such a street meant moving along paths built not just for a year or two, but for centuries, for these surfaces lasted far longer than simple dirt or wooden planks. The stones could shift under the pressure of carts and horses, yet they could be reset, reused, and maintained with relative ease. Entire trades grew around the laying of cobblestones, and master pavers passed their craft from one generation to the next. Beyond practicality, cobblestone streets also defined the look and feel of medieval towns. Narrow lanes lined with timbered houses or stone buildings were paved with cobbles that reflected lantern light at night and echoed with the sound of hooves and footsteps by day. The irregular surface slowed carts and horses, reducing accidents in crowded quarters, and the stones themselves were far easier to clean than mud. Town leaders recognized these advantages and invested in paving projects that gave their settlements a sense of permanence and order. In many cases, the presence of cobblestone streets was a sign of prosperity, marking a town as established and organized. Not all cobblestones were the same. Some regions relied on naturally rounded stones, while others began cutting stones into more regular shapes to create smoother surfaces. Granite, basalt, and limestone were common materials, each chosen for availability and durability. In northern Europe, where glaciers had left vast fields of rounded stones, natural cobbles were plentiful. In other regions, quarries provided blocks that could be shaped more precisely. The choice of stone influenced the character of the street, with some appearing rough and uneven, others smooth and almost patterned. Regardless of their form, they shared a quality of endurance, surviving where wooden planks rotted or dirt paths eroded. Over time, cobblestone streets came to be associated with charm as well as utility. Travelers described them in journals, artists painted them in townscapes, and writers evoked their sound and feel in poetry and prose. To hear the clatter of iron wheels on cobblestones or the ringing of hoofs was to know one was in a place of life and activity. In this way, cobblestone streets became woven into the sensory memory of generations. Their endurance also meant that many still exist today, carrying not only traffic, but history itself. To imagine one of these streets centuries ago is to picture merchants opening shops along narrow lanes, the smell of bread drifting from ovens, the sound of bells from a church tower above, and beneath it all the solid surface of cobblestones holding the town together. Though uneven, though sometimes difficult to walk upon, they served faithfully, year after year, century after century. Their story is long because it is not only about stone, but about people, those who laid them, those who walked them, and those who continue to preserve them as silent witnesses of history. As cobblestone streets became more common across medieval towns and cities, they began to represent not only durability, but also civic pride. For to pave a street with stones was to declare that a community had the resources and organization to maintain order and permanence. In many European towns, guilds of masons and pavers were tasked with the responsibility of laying these stones, their knowledge passed from master to apprentice in careful tradition. The work was slow and deliberate, each cobble chosen, placed, and tapped into position with care, for a street that was well made could last for centuries, and many indeed did. To maintain such streets was equally important, and towns often levied taxes or required local households to contribute labor for their upkeep. This sense of shared responsibility ensured that cobblestone roads were not only physical pathways, but also communal projects binding neighbors together. The design of cobblestone streets was as functional as it was enduring. Builders laid the stones in patterns that allowed water to drain efficiently, often with a slight arch in the middle, so that rain would flow toward the sides. This curvature, known as a crown, prevented water from pooling and kept the stone stable. Gaps between cobbles were filled with sand, gravel, or even mortar, depending on the period and region. And this flexibility allowed the street to shift slightly under pressure without cracking. The rounded surfaces of cobbles meant that wheels and hooves could pass even when the ground was wet. And though the ride was rougher than on smoother surfaces, it was dependable in all seasons. This reliability made cobblestones the choice of bustling market towns, where carts rolled in daily from the countryside, carrying grain, wool, vegetables, and fish. The sound of wheels clattering across stone became the rhythm of commerce, echoing down narrow lanes lined with shops and workshops. Cobblestone streets also shaped the experience of travelers. Pilgrims crossing Europe on long journeys often described in their journals the relief of reaching a town where the streets were paved, a welcome change after miles of muddy tracks. Merchants noted that goods arrived more safely in towns with cobbled roads, where carts were less likely to sink or break. Even kings and nobles recognized their importance, ordering the paving of streets near castles, palaces, and major churches to impress visitors and ease movement. Thus, cobblestones spread not only through necessity, but also through prestige. The presence of cobbled roads became a marker of civilization, distinguishing established towns from rural villages. In some places, authorities regulated the use of cobblestones carefully. Streets near markets or main squares were paved first, followed by roads leading to gates and bridges. Lesser alleys were sometimes left unpaved, their dirt surfaces reminding all of the difference between central and marginal spaces. Over time, entire districts could be mapped by the texture beneath one's feet. To walk from a muddy lane into a paved square was to feel the transition from ordinary life to the shared space of the town. The stones themselves were often chosen from local sources, and so cobblestone streets carried the character of their region. In areas near rivers, rounded water-worn stones dominated. In areas with quarries, flatter cut stones gave streets a more even appearance. Some towns even experimented with decorative patterns, arranging cobbles in herringbone or circular designs that added beauty to function. These patterns, still visible in some historic districts, remind us that even practical work can carry artistry. Beyond Europe, cobblestones found use in Asia and the Americas, brought by travelers, conquerors, and colonists who recognized their utility. In colonial towns of the New World, cobblestone streets became enduring features that remain today, their surfaces telling the story of adaptation and continuity across continents. To imagine life along such a street is to hear the creak of carts at dawn, the shouts of merchants, the ringing of church bells in the distance, and the steady contact of human footsteps against stone. The texture may have been uneven, sometimes challenging to walk upon, but it gave assurance that the path beneath would not wash away with the rain. This assurance, repeated day after day, year after year, made cobblestone streets a foundation not just of travel, but of trust, a quiet presence holding communities together through centuries of change. As the centuries unfolded, cobblestone streets became an inseparable part of the daily rhythm of towns and cities, their uneven surfaces echoing with the sound of countless footsteps, hooves, and wheels. They were not only practical thoroughfares, but also stages upon which life unfolded, where merchants sold their goods, neighbors exchanged greetings, and children played with simple toys fashioned from wood or cloth. In the Middle Ages, the presence of cobblestone streets gave order to the growing complexity of urban life, channeling the flow of people and goods through lanes that connected markets, churches, guild halls, and city gates. The stones endured when timber frames cracked, when thatched roofs rotted, and when fires swept through towns, for though buildings might rise and fall, the cobblestones beneath them often remained, silently recording the continuity of settlement. Maintaining these streets required skill and effort, for though durable, cobbles shifted with time and weather. After heavy rains or the passage of heavy carts, stones could loosen and pavers would be called upon to reset them. This ongoing maintenance meant that cobblestones were never static, but living surfaces, adjusted and cared for as part of the urban fabric. To walk a cobblestone street was therefore to experience something that had been touched by countless hands, each stone placed and replaced across generations. In some towns, responsibility for upkeep fell to guilds or local councils, while in others, residents were required to contribute labor or funds. This shared responsibility reinforced the communal character of cobblestone streets, for they belonged to everyone and demanded collective care. Beyond practicality, cobblestones also carried symbolic weight. In great cities such as Paris or Prague, the sound of wheels on stone was the sound of civic authority, of order imposed on the chaos of mud and dust. In smaller towns, paved streets near a market square marked the center of community life, a physical reminder of prosperity and stability. Visitors arriving from rural paths knew immediately, upon stepping onto cobbles, that they had entered a place of permanence. The texture underfoot was not merely functional, but also cultural, a sign of belonging to a larger story. Cobblestones also influenced the pace of life. Unlike smoother surfaces, they slowed carts and riders, forcing careful movement through narrow streets. This slowing reduced accidents, protected pedestrians, and gave towns a rhythm distinct from the open countryside. The clatter of iron wheels on stone became a sound associated with towns themselves, as distinctive as the tolling of bells or the murmur of marketplaces. This sensory imprint, the feel, the sound, even the sight of irregular stones shining after rain, became part of the identity of urban living. Different regions developed their own styles of cobblestone paving. In some places, large rounded river stones created surfaces that were picturesque but rough to travel. In others, flatter quarried stones produced smoother rides, especially in areas where wealthy merchants or rulers demanded elegance as well as function. Decorative patterns appeared in some streets, with stones laid in fans, circles, or intricate arrangements that reflected local artistry. These details turned ordinary streets into enduring works of craft, reminding passers-by that beauty and function could coexist. Over time, cobblestones became part of the historical memory of revolts, processions, and parades. Soldiers marched across them, pilgrims walked barefoot in devotion, and rulers rode in triumph, the stones bearing witness to events both ordinary and extraordinary. They were silent observers of joy and sorrow, continuity and upheaval. Even today, when one walks down a preserved cobblestone lane, one walks not only on stone, but on history itself. For each smooth surface and irregular gap holds the imprint of lives long past. Their endurance across centuries speaks to the human desire for permanence amid change, for order amid uncertainty. Though uneven and sometimes difficult to navigate, cobblestone streets offered reliability, and in that reliability lay comfort. To imagine such a street at dusk is to hear the fading sound of hooves, to see the glow of lanterns reflected on wet stones, to feel the solidity of the ground beneath your feet as the day's activity settles into night. The cobbles, unchanging yet alive with memory, remain a testament to the quiet strength of human hands and the enduring presence of community. As cobblestone streets spread through Europe and beyond, they became more than just paths of stone. They were threads stitching together the daily lives of people across centuries. To walk along them was to move through history in the making, for these stones bore witness to countless small moments that together formed the fabric of society. In medieval cities, the streets carried the footsteps of artisans heading to workshops at dawn, monks shuffling toward monasteries, bakers wheeling carts filled with warm bread, and merchants setting up stalls in crowded market squares. The sound of horses pulling wagons echoed through narrow lanes, iron rims striking against stone, while children played in corners, their laughter mixing with the clatter. The stones themselves endured silently, recording the passage of time, not in words, but in the smoothness of their surfaces, worn down by centuries of contact. Beyond their daily use, cobblestone streets also played roles in civic life. Processions of kings and nobles moved across them, their banners fluttering, their armor gleaming in sunlight, while citizens watched from doorways and windows. Religious ceremonies wound through them, with bells ringing, incense drifting, and chants echoing between walls. In darker times, soldiers marched along these streets to enforce rule or suppress unrest, and uprisings left their marks in blood spilled upon stone. The cobbles were impartial, neither celebrating nor mourning, but always bearing the weight of human events. They became stages upon which history unfolded, holding within them memories of triumph and tragedy alike. The durability of cobblestones meant that many streets remained unchanged, even as buildings around them rose, fell, and were rebuilt. Fires swept through towns, yet after the ashes cooled, the cobbles still lay in place, ready to support the rebuilding. Floods rushed through, but the stones, anchored by careful laying, resisted the force of water better than dirt tracks ever could. In this way, cobblestones became symbols of continuity, surviving where more fragile structures did not. Their resilience gave comfort to townspeople, who knew that though walls might crumble, the streets beneath their feet would endure. Over time, different regions refined the craft of paving. In the Low Countries, skilled workers developed techniques to fit cobbles tightly together, creating surfaces that were both durable and elegant. In Italy, patterns of stone were laid to highlight public squares, turning open spaces into works of geometric beauty. In England, narrow lanes of villages were paved with cobbles that curved gently to guide rain into gutters, making them practical even in heavy weather. These variations reflected local resources and tastes, yet all shared the same principle: to create streets that lasted, serving generation after generation. The cobblestone also shaped the pace and texture of urban life. Unlike smooth surfaces, it slowed the movement of carts and riders, creating a rhythm of careful passage. Wheels rattled and hooves clicked, the sounds filling the air in a cadence that became as familiar as church bells or market cries. Even today, in preserved districts where cobblestones remain, one can hear this echo of the past in the sound of footsteps, a reminder of continuity stretching back through centuries. As towns expanded, cobblestone streets connected neighborhoods, linking homes to markets, markets to churches, and towns to roads beyond. They were veins through which the lifeblood of community flowed, essential for the movement of food, goods, and people. Without them, towns could not function as hubs of trade or culture. To imagine such a street at twilight is to see lanterns glowing faintly on walls, the day's bustle fading into quiet, the stones glistening softly with evening dew. The people retreat into homes, but the cobblestones remain, patient and unchanging, waiting for another dawn when life will begin again upon their surface. Their story is one of endurance, not of spectacle, but in their endurance lies their power, for they remind us that even the simplest of human creations can outlast kingdoms, wars, and generations, carrying forward the quiet memory of countless lives. As we follow the long story of cobblestone streets further into history, we see how their presence shaped not only towns, but also the daily habits, rhythms, and imaginations of the people who lived upon them. In many European cities of the Renaissance and early modern period, the cobblestone became more than a practical solution. It became a backdrop for civic life, a stage upon which the ordinary and extraordinary unfolded. The surfaces echoed with the wheels of carts laden with goods from distant markets, with the footsteps of scholars hurrying to universities, with the slow processions of guild members displaying their banners, and with the solemn tread of funerals winding through narrow lanes. The stones carried these lives without distinction, worn smooth by their endless repetition. Travelers often describe their encounters with cobblestone streets, noting the roughness of the ride when wagons bumped along them, but also the relief of entering a town where the way was paved and reliable. For merchants carrying fragile goods, the jolting was worth enduring, for they knew the road would not dissolve into mud under heavy rain. For pilgrims, the stones were reminders of the permanence of the path, that their journeys were guided not only by faith, but by the enduring labor of countless hands who had laid each stone. In times of ceremony, the cobblestones reflected the grandeur of parades and the solemnity of coronations, their surfaces bearing the weight of history as rulers passed by. In times of unrest, the same stones became weapons, pried loose by rioters to be hurled in defiance, or barriers piled across streets to form makeshift defenses. In this way, cobblestones played roles both peaceful and violent, silent partners in the unfolding of human affairs. Their durability made them silent witnesses across centuries, holding stories in their surfaces long after voices had faded. The craft of laying cobblestones also developed into a specialized art. Pavers learned to read the shapes of stones, to turn them in just the right way, to set them firmly with sand or gravel so they would not loosen. They developed patterns that guided water, reduced wear, and gave beauty to the streets. Some pavements were laid in straight rows, others in arcs or herringbone designs, the variations reflecting both local style and the pride of those who worked with stone. These craftsmen rarely saw their names remembered, yet their work endured for generations, a testament to skill performed with patience and care. Across oceans, cobblestone streets also appeared in colonial towns of the Americas, carried by settlers who brought with them both techniques and traditions from Europe. In places such as Boston, Cartagena, and Havana, cobblestones gave permanence to streets that might otherwise have washed away in tropical rains. The same echoes of hooves, wheels, and footsteps filled those distant colonies, connecting them to the long history of stone-paved paths across continents. The stones themselves varied by region, sometimes rounded and rough, other times cut and even, but all shared the same resilience, capable of withstanding centuries of use. Even when neglected, overgrown with moss or buried beneath newer layers, cobblestones often waited patiently to be uncovered again by archaeologists or city workers centuries later. To imagine such a street in its prime is to picture dawn breaking over a busy town, shopkeepers opening shutters, the smell of bread and smoke drifting into the air, the sound of iron-shod wheels striking stone as carts roll past, the voices of merchants mingling with the cries of children. At night, lanterns would flicker across uneven surfaces, the stones glistening after rain, guiding travelers safely through darkened lanes. Though ordinary, these streets shaped the experience of all who walked them, giving a foundation to life itself. The long story of cobblestones is therefore not simply about stone and labor, but about permanence in a world of change, about the ways human beings seek to create stability beneath their feet. They endure as a reminder that even the humblest of surfaces can hold within them the memory of centuries, and in their quiet strength, they continue to guide us forward. As cobblestone streets carried towns and cities into the modern era, their story deepened, for they were no longer just medieval solutions to mud and rain, but symbols of heritage that lingered even as new materials and methods began to appear. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as commerce expanded and populations grew, the demand for more reliable and smoother roads increased. Carts became heavier, coaches faster, and goods traveled farther than ever before. Cobblestones, durable as they were, could be rough and uncomfortable for long journeys, so engineers experimented with alternatives such as larger flat paving stones or macadam, a method that used layers of crushed stone, bound by pressure and later by tar. Yet despite these innovations, cobblestones remained widespread, especially in the narrow streets of older towns where their endurance was unmatched. The very unevenness that made them difficult for fast carriages gave them stability against erosion, and so they continued to support the everyday life of markets, pedestrians, and local carts. Their resilience meant that while wooden bridges collapsed and brick buildings crumbled, the streets beneath often survived, needing only occasional resetting. For many communities, cobblestones became part of identity. Travelers arriving in towns such as Prague, Bruges, or Edinburgh noted not only the architecture but also the streets themselves, whose irregular stones gave character and charm. The echo of footsteps on cobblestones became part of the sensory memory of place, a sound that travelers recalled with nostalgia. Writers and painters captured these streets in their works, seeing in them both the romance of history and the endurance of craftsmanship. Even in colonies far from Europe, the presence of cobblestones marked a connection to tradition. In cities of the Americas, from New Orleans to Rio de Janeiro, cobblestone lanes spoke of continuity, linking distant places through shared patterns of stone. These surfaces also played unexpected roles in social life. Because cobblestone slowed vehicles, streets often became spaces where people gathered more safely, lingering in conversation or watching processions pass by. Markets spilled into the lanes, with stalls set up directly on the stones, and festivals filled them with music, banners, and laughter. The stones were not only supports for wheels, but stages for human interaction, grounding the life of the town in shared spaces that endured across centuries. In times of upheaval, cobblestones became symbols of defiance as well as order. Rioters and revolutionaries pried stones from streets to hurl as weapons or to build barricades, turning the very foundation of civic life into tools of resistance. In Paris, during the revolutions of the 19th century, the phrase, "under the cobblestones, the beach," emerged as a metaphor for liberation, for the stones that once held order could be lifted to reveal new possibilities. Thus, cobblestones became charged with meanings beyond practicality, associated with both the weight of tradition and the energy of change. Yet even as their role shifted, their presence endured. They were repaired, reset, and in many cases preserved, because communities valued the sense of continuity they gave. To step onto a cobblestone street was to step into history, to feel the link between present and past. Even when modern paving spread through boulevards and highways, the older districts of towns often kept their cobbles, treasuring them not for convenience but for memory. To imagine one of these streets at dusk in the 19th century is to see carriages rattling slowly along, shopkeepers closing wooden shutters, lamps casting golden light on the irregular stones, and passers-by hearing the familiar clatter that tied their lives to generations before them. The cobblestones lay patient beneath all this activity, their strength neither loud nor fragile, their story carried quietly with each step. Their endurance into the modern age reminds us that human creations need not be grand to be lasting, and that sometimes the simplest of surfaces can hold within them the longest of histories. As the 19th century turned toward the 20th, cobblestone streets found themselves at the meeting point of tradition and modernity. For centuries, they had carried the weight of hooves, wooden carts, and the footsteps of countless generations. But now they faced the arrival of bicycles, motor cars, and electric trams. The rough, uneven texture of cobblestones that had once been their strength became a challenge for new forms of transportation. Carriages with iron-rimmed wheels had rattled noisily over them, but the new pneumatic tires of bicycles and automobiles made the jolts even more pronounced. Still, despite these difficulties, cobblestones continued to endure in older quarters, holding their ground as smoother asphalt and concrete began to take over main roads. Their persistence was not merely due to habit, but to resilience. Cobblestone streets required little material maintenance, only the resetting of stones when they shifted, and they withstood rain, snow, and frost far better than early asphalt, which often cracked and crumbled. In many European cities, cobblestones became the default surface for neighborhoods that were centuries old, places where time seemed to move at a slower pace. Narrow alleys, medieval squares, and historic marketplaces retained their stone paving, the uneven surfaces preserving an atmosphere of authenticity. Tourists and artists were drawn to them, seeing in the cobblestones not inconvenience but charm. Painters captured the way light glistened on wet stones after rain, and photographers immortalized the shadows of narrow lanes where the cobbles seemed to glow under gaslight. Writers described the sound of footsteps echoing on them as a symbol of history whispering through modern life. In this way, cobblestones transitioned from being purely practical to being cultural artifacts, valued as part of a shared heritage. Yet their role was not only romantic. In times of conflict, they again became tools of resistance. During uprisings in the 20th century, protesters tore cobblestones from the ground to build barricades or to throw at occupying forces. The stones that had once symbolized order and permanence became, once more, instruments of disruption and defiance. Their durability made them as useful in the chaos of revolt as in the routine of daily markets. Thus, cobblestones became paradoxical symbols, standing for both tradition and rebellion, continuity and change. Beyond politics, they shaped the experience of modern life in subtle ways. Children still played games on them, rolling marbles or kicking balls that bounced unpredictably. Elderly residents remembered the stories of ancestors who had walked the same streets centuries before. Merchants still set up stalls along cobbled squares, their goods spilling into spaces that had hosted trade for generations. The stones created a sense of continuity that smoothed the passage of time, reminding people that though technology changed, the ground beneath could remain familiar. In colonial cities across the Americas and Asia, cobblestones preserved by neglect rather than design continued to carry life forward. In places like Old San Juan or Macau, their patterns remained intact, worn by centuries of traffic, giving visitors today the uncanny sense of stepping backward into another age. These streets became anchors of identity, linking communities to their layered histories. By the mid-20th century, many cities faced choices about whether to replace cobblestones entirely with modern paving. Some did, seeking efficiency, while others preserved sections intentionally, recognizing their historic and cultural value. In time, cobblestone streets became prized as heritage, part of the identity of neighborhoods and cities. Walking them today is not always easy. Heels catch, wheels rattle, and steps may falter. But they remind us that the past is still present underfoot. Their unevenness is their story, written in stone across centuries. To imagine a cobblestone street in this era is to picture an early motor car, rattling slowly over its surface, bicycles weaving carefully to avoid jolts, street lamps casting pools of golden light, and families strolling in the evening air. Beneath them, the stones remain as they have always been, steady, patient, carrying forward the memory of generations. Their story at this point is not finished, for cobblestones continue to live with us. But it is already long enough to remind us that even the humblest surface can endure through the rise and fall of ages, whispering history through every step we take. As the 20th century unfolded, cobblestone streets gradually shifted from the realm of necessity into the realm of nostalgia. With the invention of automobiles, cities around the world faced new challenges in managing traffic, speed, and infrastructure, and smoother surfaces like asphalt and concrete promised a modern solution. Municipal planners argued that cobblestones slowed progress, rattled engines, and made long journeys uncomfortable. Yet while many central avenues were resurfaced, large portions of older districts retained their cobblestones simply because removing them was a monumental task. They had been laid with care, stone by stone, bedded on layers of sand or gravel that had settled into the earth over centuries, and they resisted attempts to uproot them. This resistance gave rise to a curious duality. Cobblestones became both a reminder of inefficiency and a symbol of resilience. The same roughness that frustrated motorists made walkers and historians pause, reflecting on the fact that these stones had outlasted empires, monarchies, and revolutions. Some city councils began to view them not as obstacles, but as heritage, protecting them under preservation laws. In European capitals such as Paris, Prague, and Lisbon, they became part of the city's charm, attracting visitors who wanted to feel the weight of history beneath their feet. In Latin America, cities like Cartagena or Havana preserved entire neighborhoods of cobblestones, their uneven rhythm echoing with the music and laughter of daily life, blending colonial past with living present. What was once merely functional had become atmospheric, a stage for culture and memory. The sound of horse hooves had given way to the hum of engines, but the stones still resonated with the stories of centuries. Travelers spoke of the particular feel of walking on cobblestones, the way the stones pressed into the soles of shoes, forcing each step to be deliberate and steady, reminding the walker of the fragility of balance and the persistence of time. Artists lingered in these places, sketching arches and fountains that rose above the cobbled streets, noting how the irregular patterns of stones gave a natural rhythm to the scenes. Even the wear on the cobbles told stories, depressions formed by wagon wheels, smooth patches polished by countless shoes, edges chipped during demonstrations or celebrations. They became a living archive of use and memory. Meanwhile, modern engineers debated whether cobblestones had any place in a future dominated by vehicles and efficiency. The answer varied from place to place. Some nations embraced modern paving without hesitation, burying cobblestones under thick layers of asphalt, but others left them exposed in historical centers, where traffic was limited and walking was encouraged. Tourists marveled at them. Residents cursed them when pushing strollers or riding bicycles, and yet their presence endured. By mid-century, in the aftermath of wars that had scarred entire cities, cobblestones took on yet another meaning: survival. In towns reduced to rubble, the streets often remained intact, the stones holding their shape even when buildings collapsed around them. People returning to ruined homes recognized the paths they had known since childhood because the cobblestones were still there, guiding them through loss and rebuilding. In this way, they came to represent continuity, a reminder that though destruction may sweep away walls and roofs, the ground itself remembers. In peaceful decades that followed, cobblestones became deliberate markers of heritage. Architects and planners integrated them into restoration projects, relaying them in historic districts to give visitors a tangible sense of antiquity. Cafes spilled onto cobbled squares, artists painted street scenes, and festivals filled alleys where stones glistened under decorative lights. The cobblestones, once scorned as backward, now conferred value by evoking authenticity. In places like Bruges, Rothenburg, or colonial Williamsburg, they became indispensable to the illusion of time travel, helping visitors feel transported into another age. Yet even as they became prized, they never lost their practical edge. In certain climates, cobblestones continued to drain rain effectively, reducing puddles compared to flat asphalt. And in rural or mountainous areas, they provided traction on steep slopes where smoother materials failed. Thus, cobblestones lived a double life. Heritage on one hand, practicality on the other. They no longer dominated modern road systems, but they refused to disappear. In a world obsessed with speed, they slowed the pace, encouraging pause and reflection. They whispered of history, not in grand monuments or towering statues, but in the ground beneath ordinary feet. And so, by the later decades of the century, cobblestones had transitioned into symbols of both memory and endurance, reminders that not all progress requires erasure, and that sometimes the oldest paths still carry meaning long after the world around them has changed. As the world moved into the late 20th century and early 21st, cobblestone streets found themselves at the intersection of nostalgia and practicality, and their story continued to unfold in subtle ways that were often overlooked by casual observers. In many cities, modernization pressed forward relentlessly, with asphalt and concrete dominating new construction and expansion projects. Yet the cobblestones remained, not only because of heritage laws or the difficulty of removal, but also because they carried a charm that newer surfaces could not replicate. Walking through an old district lined with cobbles offered a sensory experience unlike any other. The faint unevenness underfoot, the slight echo of footsteps, the shimmer of stones when rain washed over them, and the way shadows from lamplight clung to their irregular edges at night. Urban planners in historic districts began to treat cobblestones as assets rather than liabilities, deliberately restoring them when tourism became a crucial part of the local economy. Cities realized that people did not travel thousands of miles to see the same concrete surfaces they had at home. Instead, they sought authenticity, and cobblestone streets provided exactly that. Whether it was an alley in Rome, a plaza in Mexico City, or a colonial lane in Boston, the stones created an atmosphere that felt timeless, quietly reminding each visitor that countless others had walked the same path over hundreds of years. Preservation efforts expanded during this era, often involving careful documentation, lifting, and resetting of stones that had shifted or sunk with time. Craftsmen, sometimes trained specifically for such work, ensured that the traditional methods of laying stones were not lost to history. Unlike pouring asphalt, which could be completed quickly, cobblestone restoration was slow, deliberate, and almost meditative. Each stone required placement by hand, each angle judged with care, each surface adjusted to maintain a rhythm across the street. This slow labor mirrored the pace of life in earlier centuries, and many restoration workers spoke of the quiet satisfaction in preserving something both beautiful and durable. Meanwhile, environmental considerations brought a new layer of relevance to cobblestones. Unlike impermeable asphalt, which often contributed to flooding in urban areas, cobblestones allowed rainwater to filter through the cracks, replenishing the ground below and reducing runoff. With cities around the world struggling to adapt to heavier rains and climate change, urban designers began to reconsider old methods as new solutions. Permeable pavements, inspired by the logic of cobblestones, became a topic of serious study, yet in many cases the original cobbles already served the purpose admirably. Their endurance over centuries became a quiet argument in favor of learning from the past rather than discarding it entirely. At the same time, modern daily life often collided with the inconveniences of these ancient streets. Cyclists cursed the vibrations that rattled through their wheels. Wheelchair users found them difficult to navigate, and delivery drivers lamented the slower pace of travel. City authorities balanced these complaints with the economic and cultural value of preservation. In some places, hybrid solutions were adopted, with smoother paths carved into cobbled districts, offering accessibility without erasing history. This compromise demonstrated the resilience of cobblestones, not just as physical objects, but as cultural artifacts capable of adapting to new contexts. Cultural symbolism continued to surround these streets as well. In literature and cinema, cobblestones were used as shorthand for history, romance, or rebellion. Films set in old European cities often lingered on shots of narrow cobbled alleys, capturing the sense of intimacy and age. In novels, characters walking such streets often found themselves reflecting on their place in history, the stones acting as silent companions to human thought. Even protests and parades left their marks upon them, as banners were raised and chants echoed against walls, while feet pressed firmly on the uneven ground. The stones, indifferent and enduring, witnessed moments of joy and anger alike, adding layers of meaning to their already long existence. For those who lived beside them daily, cobblestones became part of identity. Residents of historic districts might have complained about the difficulty of rolling luggage or strollers, but they also spoke with pride when visitors admired the beauty of their neighborhoods. Businesses promoted their location with the phrase, "on the cobblestones," knowing that it conjured images of charm and history. Couples often chose cobbled squares as backdrops for wedding photographs, believing the ancient setting lent gravity to their personal milestones. Thus, by the turn of the century, cobblestones had become more than just relics. They were part of the cultural fabric of cities, stitched into the ways people imagined and marketed their communities. Their uneven rhythm continued to dictate the pace of daily life, slowing modern feet just enough to notice the past. And in that slowing, a connection formed, a quiet acknowledgement that while technology advanced and skylines changed, there was something grounding in the persistence of stone. They carried whispers of centuries, reminding all who walked upon them that history is not confined to museums or monuments, but lies directly beneath our steps, guiding us gently forward even as we look back. In the quiet story of cobblestone streets, the present day is not an ending, but another chapter in a tale that continues to stretch forward with the same unhurried rhythm it has always known. Across the world, travelers still seek out these uneven lanes, not because they offer convenience or speed, but because they provide something modern pavements cannot. They offer continuity, a visible line connecting the footsteps of medieval merchants, colonial settlers, revolutionaries, and ordinary townsfolk to those of tourists and residents today. The surface may be bumpy, the edges imperfect, but that is precisely the appeal, for perfection in modern life often comes at the cost of sterility, and cobblestones resist that trade. Each stone remains distinct, cut and placed by human hands long gone, yet still performing its duty centuries later, outlasting the lives and ambitions of those who laid them. In many places, entire neighborhoods have chosen to preserve them not as monuments fenced off from daily life, but as active streets where cars roll slowly, bicycles rattle, and shoes click with an uneven music. This continuity of use is itself remarkable, for very few elements of urban infrastructure survive in functional form for hundreds of years. Bridges may collapse, wooden beams may rot, and asphalt crumbles in just a few decades, yet these stones, once considered primitive technology, persist with quiet confidence. They have adapted to traffic patterns unimagined by their builders, endured the pounding of horses and wheels, then the vibration of engines, and now the weight of buses and trucks, still holding together in their patient geometry. Their story also holds lessons for the modern world. In an era obsessed with speed, cobblestones force slowness. Cars cannot accelerate recklessly over them without discomfort. Pedestrians cannot rush without watching their step. The stones impose a natural rhythm, demanding attention and presence, reminding each traveler that movement is not always about reaching the destination quickly, but about feeling the ground along the way. In this sense, cobblestones teach patience, something increasingly rare in the hurried atmosphere of 21st century life. For city planners, the stones highlight a paradox. What was once ordinary infrastructure has become extraordinary heritage, and decisions must be made carefully. Some cities have chosen to cover cobbles with asphalt to ease modern traffic, only to later peel it back when citizens protested the loss of character. Others have invested heavily in restoration, accepting the higher costs as a trade for tourism and cultural identity. And in certain towns, cobblestones remain untouched, not because of deliberate preservation, but because they never cease to be useful, blending into daily routines so seamlessly that residents barely notice them. even while visitors marvel. Beyond practicality, cobblestones now serve as symbols in public imagination. They appear in postcards, travel guides, and advertisements as shorthand for charm and authenticity. They carry associations of romance when couples stroll hand in hand through European alleys, of rebellion when protesters hurl loose stones during demonstrations, and of community when festivals or markets take place in cobbled squares. The same stone that once served to stabilize a cartwheel now stabilizes memory, holding together the story of a city in physical form. It is not just about where we walk, but about what we inherit. Children who play soccer on cobbled streets in South America unknowingly follow the rhythm of games played generations before them. Street musicians in Prague or Lisbon stand upon stones that once echoed with the footsteps of emperors and generals. A grandmother shopping for bread in a colonial town of the Caribbean steps on the same patterns that guided her ancestors, the familiarity of the stones linking her to a chain of lives stretching centuries back. And in each case, the cobblestones themselves remain silent, offering continuity without commentary, their endurance speaking louder than words. In the larger arc of human history, cobblestones remind us that not all progress requires replacement. Sometimes preservation is itself a form of innovation, for it offers balance against the relentless churn of novelty. In a future filled with new materials, digital infrastructures, and smart cities, cobblestones will seem almost alien. Yet precisely because of that, they will retain their charm. Visitors will continue to pause, to photograph, to feel the texture beneath their feet, as if touching a living relic. And perhaps that is the quiet gift of cobblestones, to remind us that beneath every smooth road lies a foundation of labor, patience, and endurance. They may never claim grandeur, yet they endure in a way monuments cannot, because they live beneath us, integrated into the most ordinary acts of walking home, running errands, or pausing at a corner. As long as people value authenticity, as long as cities wish to tell their stories not just through museums, but through streets themselves, the cobblestones will remain. Their long story is not concluded, for each footstep, each wheel, each drop of rain adds another layer. They are not relics to be looked at, but companions to be lived with. And so, as the world grows faster, brighter, and more complex, the cobblestones will continue their quiet work, one stone after another, whispering history beneath our steps, proving that sometimes the simplest foundations endure the longest, carrying us forward while reminding us always of where we came from. And that brings us to the end of the story we have just traveled together. Before we move on to the next chapter, I kindly ask you to give me a like and a subscribe if you enjoyed this calm journey. Your support helps keep these sleepy tales alive. Now let us continue with the next story in our series of Boring History for Sleep, as we slowly drift into the world of what it was like to build a cathedral bell tower. In the heart of medieval Europe, the skyline of many towns and cities was defined not by the homes of the wealthy or the palaces of kings, but by the rising shapes of cathedrals, their spires and towers climbing higher than anything else in sight. Among the most striking features of these sacred structures were the bell towers, tall and enduring, symbols of faith, civic pride, and the labor of generations. To imagine what it was like to build one is to step back into a world where construction stretched over decades, even centuries, and where the process was as much about devotion as it was about stone and mortar. The building of a cathedral bell tower was never the work of a single man or even a single generation. It began first with the laying of foundations, a task that required more preparation than one might think. The soil had to be tested, often by experience rather than science, and trenches dug deep to hold a base strong enough to carry thousands of tons of stone. Wooden scaffolding was erected, reaching upward, not in days, but over long seasons of planning and toil. Masons worked carefully, their chisels shaping blocks of limestone, sandstone, or granite, each piece cut by hand to fit snugly against the next. These stones were hoisted upward by wooden cranes powered by treadwheels, giant hamster wheel-like devices turned by men walking inside them, their steady steps raising blocks that might weigh hundreds of pounds. To be one of those workers inside the wheel was to feel the strain of progress in your bones. Each step a reminder that the tower inched higher only through patience and persistence. The tower itself grew slowly, course by course, its walls sometimes as thick as several men standing side by side. These thick bases were necessary, for as the tower reached skyward, the weight pressing downward increased dramatically. Every mistake in alignment, every weakness in mortar, could spell disaster. There are tales of towers that cracked or leaned, of builders forced to halt their work for fear that years of labor would crumble into dust. Yet the work continued, driven not only by faith, but also by the community's desire to outshine neighboring towns. For in the Middle Ages, a grand bell tower was not merely a religious symbol. It was a statement of wealth, of stability, of prestige. To live in the shadow of such a tower was to live with constant reminders of the slow march of human effort. Each morning, workers gathered as the bells of smaller chapels rang, and the day began with the lifting of new stones. Apprentices carried water for mixing mortar, fetched tools, and learned from master masons who had spent decades perfecting their craft. Carpenters shaped the wooden frames that would hold arches in place until the stone could support itself. Blacksmiths forged the iron clamps and nails that bound wood and stone together. The air around a construction site was filled with the sounds of hammers, chisels, the creak of wooden cranes, and the steady murmur of men at work. It was not only physical labor, but also an act of faith. For each stone placed was a step closer to heaven, or so it was believed. Building a bell tower was not without danger. Accidents were common, as men climbed scaffolding high above the ground. A misstep could be fatal. Falling stones could crush those below. The treadwheels demanded stamina, and exhaustion could lead to slips that endangered everyone nearby. There were few safety measures, and injuries were often accepted as an unfortunate but inevitable cost of construction. Yet, despite the risks, the work never stopped. Generations of families sometimes labored on the same tower, fathers passing their knowledge to sons, their hands shaping the same walls their ancestors had begun. Some cathedrals took over 100 years to complete, meaning that many of those who began the work never saw it finished. Still, the promise of completion, the hope that one day the bells would ring out across the countryside, kept the work alive. The bells themselves were marvels of craftsmanship, cast in great foundries where molten bronze was poured into molds lined with clay. Each bell was tuned to produce a specific tone, and when placed in the tower, together they formed a peal that could be heard for miles. To raise these massive bells into their place near the top of the tower required careful planning, for a bell could weigh several tons. Hoisting them with ropes and cranes was a dangerous but awe-inspiring sight. As the great instruments swung slowly upward, their journey watched by the townspeople who would one day hear their sound mark weddings, funerals, feasts, and the passing of hours. The building of a cathedral bell tower was a community endeavor, funded by wealthy patrons, but also by the small donations of ordinary townsfolk. Markets were often held to raise money, and sermons urged the faithful to contribute. To give a coin was to take part in a lasting monument, one that would stand long after its donors had turned to dust. The finished tower, when at last it stood complete, was more than stone stacked high. It was a memory of countless hours of labor, of prayers whispered by tired men, of hands blistered and worn. It was a monument to human persistence and to the belief that by building upward, one could reach closer to the divine. The work of raising a cathedral bell tower was never a project isolated from the lives of those who lived around it. It was both the background and the centerpiece of daily existence in a medieval town. Children grew up seeing the tower inch higher year by year, its scaffolding a permanent part of the skyline, its unfinished silhouette a reminder of the ambitions of their fathers and grandfathers. Women carried water past the construction site, glancing up at the progress while merchants set their stalls nearby, their voices mingling with the sound of hammer against stone. The tower was not only a monument of faith, but also a heartbeat of the community, always present, always demanding effort and attention. At its core, the construction required organization that, in its own way, rivaled the discipline of armies. A master mason, sometimes called the architect, oversaw the grand vision. His plans, drawn on parchment or even carved into wooden models, guided the placement of every stone. Beneath him were foremen who supervised specific crews. Some cut and shaped stone blocks, others mixed mortar from lime and sand, while others managed the cranes and ropes that lifted heavy materials skyward. To keep such a vast workforce moving required both skill and authority, and disputes were frequent. Pay was often irregular, food supplies not always secure, and the work itself backbreaking. Yet, despite complaints and occasional strikes, the promise of steady employment kept men returning. For many laborers, the construction site was the only source of livelihood in a town where farming alone could not sustain every family. Apprenticeship was the lifeblood of this work. Boys as young as 12 were bound by contract to masters, learning not only how to carve stone, but also how to read the symbols used in architectural drawings. They lived in the homes of their masters, ate at their tables, and gradually learned the secrets of the craft through long hours of repetition. An apprentice might spend years simply rough-cutting blocks before ever being trusted to carve details for windows or arches. The apprenticeship system ensured that skills were preserved and passed forward, creating a continuity of knowledge that allowed projects spanning a century to still retain cohesion. Building a bell tower was also a marvel of engineering. Without the mathematics we know today, masons relied on geometry, string, and plumb lines. They used simple but ingenious tools, squares, compasses, and levels made of wood. By stretching cords across the rising structure, they kept lines straight, and by dropping weights attached to ropes, they checked verticality. The precision required was immense, for a small error at the base could magnify disastrously by the time the structure reached its lofty summit. To climb the scaffolding was to encounter the tower as a living organism. Workers moved up and down wooden ladders, their arms carrying buckets of mortar or chisels and mallets. The scaffolding itself was a marvel, built from massive timbers lashed together, wrapping around the tower like a skeleton. It groaned and swayed in the wind, yet it held firm, allowing men to ascend heights that few in their lifetime ever dreamed of reaching. For the workers, the view from above must have been breathtaking. Rooftops stretching below, fields and rivers in the distance, all bathed in the light of the sun that few others in the town saw from such a vantage point. Yet with the view came danger. Falling was a constant threat. There were no harnesses, no helmets, no railings. Men trusted their balance, their grip, and the sturdiness of timbers. Accidents were whispered about in taverns, stories of men who had slipped and vanished before hitting the ground. Their lives ended in an instant. Such stories gave the tower a certain aura of sacrifice, as though every block carried not only sweat, but also the memory of lives lost. And still, the work pressed onward. The bell tower was not simply a tower. It was designed to carry bells that would weigh tons and swing with great force. This meant that the interior had to be carefully structured with wooden beams, iron braces, and openings where ropes could pass down to the ringing chamber. The resonance of the bells required careful placement, and masons worked with bell founders to ensure that the sound would travel across valleys and through forests. To hear the bells was to hear the voice of the town itself, a voice strong enough to mark time, call the faithful, warn of fire, or celebrate victory. Wealthy patrons played their role as well. A noble family might fund a section of the tower, their coat of arms carved discreetly into the stone, ensuring their memory lived as long as the tower stood. Guilds of merchants or craftsmen contributed funds too, eager to show their devotion and cement their place in the community's story. Even ordinary townsfolk gave pennies, often believing that their offering would lessen their time in purgatory or earn blessings for their families. Thus, the tower was not merely a structure of stone, but also of shared sacrifice and shared faith. Each layer of stone carried within it a layer of human hope. For the townspeople, the gradual rise of the bell tower was like watching time itself materialize in stone. They knew they might never see its completion, but to contribute in even the smallest way gave them a sense of connection to eternity. And so, the work continued year after year, season after season, through rain, wind, and snow. The tower grew, not quickly but steadily, a silent testament to patience and devotion. The passage of time on a cathedral construction site was measured not only by the seasons, but by the slow ascent of stone upon stone, a rhythm that shaped entire generations. To the townspeople, the tower seemed eternal in its making, rising imperceptibly at times, then pausing as funds ran low or wars interrupted supply lines. Yet beneath this slow progress, daily life on the building site was filled with constant activity, each task contributing to the vision of a structure that aimed to touch the heavens. The quarry was often the true beginning of the tower. Blocks of limestone, sandstone, or granite were pried from the earth with wedges and hammers, a process that in itself required enormous effort and risk. Quarrymen cut trenches around massive stones, drove in wooden stakes, and then soaked the wood with water so that, expanding, it would crack the stone from its bed. These blocks were then dragged by oxen or placed on wooden sledges to be transported to the cathedral. The journey from quarry to site was slow and arduous, as heavy loads could splinter carts, sink into muddy roads, or stall at river crossings. Yet the arrival of new stone always brought a surge of energy, for it meant progress could resume. On site, masons shaped the blocks into precise forms, working with mallets and chisels that rang with a steady rhythm across the yard. Each mason developed a personal mark, a small symbol chiseled discreetly into the stone, so that when wages were calculated by piecework, their contributions could be counted. Over time, these marks became signatures, silently recording the lives of men who otherwise left few traces in history. Some of these marks still survive on cathedrals today, tiny reminders of forgotten hands that once carved the walls of faith. Mortar was equally important, the glue that bound the structure. Lime was burned in kilns, slaked with water, and then mixed with sand to form a paste that, when hardened, became almost as strong as the stone itself. The process of mixing was laborious, often involving teams of workers stomping barefoot in pits of lime and sand, their legs coated in white dust. The smell of lime, acrid and sharp, lingered across the worksite, and careless handling could burn skin. Yet without mortar, the tower could not rise, and so it was made daily in great quantities, carried in buckets up ladders to the masons, who placed each block carefully, leaving as little gap as possible. The lifting of stone to greater heights was one of the most ingenious aspects of medieval engineering. Wooden treadwheel cranes, powered by men walking inside giant wheels like hamsters, turned ropes that wound around spindles, hauling loads skyward. These cranes, simple yet powerful, could raise blocks weighing hundreds of pounds, swinging them delicately into place under the direction of the master mason. From below, townsfolk would gaze upward, marveling at the sight of blocks floating through the air as though moved by invisible hands. To stand at the top, guiding such stones into position, required not only strength, but also nerves of steel, for one slip of a rope could mean disaster. Inside the tower, carpenters built temporary wooden floors, known as centering, to support arches and vaults, until the stone could hold itself. These wooden frameworks were often as intricate as the stone structures they supported, but once the arch was complete, they were dismantled and used again higher up. Carpenters were indispensable, shaping beams for scaffolding, braces for walls, and ladders that reached higher with every season. Their work, though temporary, was crucial, and without them, the tower would have collapsed before it ever reached its intended height. Life on the site was not purely about work. It was also about endurance and adaptation. Workers labored in all weather, enduring scorching summers when the sun baked the stone until it blistered hands, and bitter winters when mortar froze before it could set. Rain turned the ground into mud, soaking shoes and clothing, while wind at great heights threatened to topple both man and material. Yet work rarely stopped entirely. To halt for too long meant losing momentum, and so adjustments were made, sometimes working with tarpaulins overhead, sometimes pausing only on the most dangerous days. Food was consumed quickly and without ceremony, often bread, cheese, onions, and weak ale brought from home or purchased from vendors who lingered near the site. Conversations over meals were likely about the progress of the tower, the temperament of the master mason, or the hazards of the day's labor. Jokes were shared, songs sung, and sometimes prayers whispered, for all knew the risks they faced daily. And yet, for many, the work was more than a way to survive. It was a chance to contribute to something larger than themselves. The bell tower was seen not only as a triumph of stone, but as a pathway to salvation. To work upon it was to offer one's hands to God. Priests often reminded the workers that every stone laid was a step toward eternity, that their sweat was sanctified through the holiness of the project. Whether this comforted men who had lost comrades to accidents or soothed the families of those injured is hard to know, but it gave meaning to toil and kept spirits aligned with the cause. As years passed, the tower rose slowly, visible proof of unending labor. To those who watched from the ground, it seemed almost magical, a structure that grew from the earth yet aspired to heaven. To those who worked upon it, it was far from magic. It was relentless, heavy, exhausting. And yet, within that exhaustion, there was also pride. for each man could point to a section of wall and know that his hands had shaped it, that his effort was embedded forever in stone. As the cathedral bell tower continued its upward climb, the relationship between those who worked upon it and the surrounding community grew more entwined. For the tower was not just an architectural endeavor, but a symbol of collective devotion, pride, and even competition among cities. Each town wished to outshine its neighbors with the height and grandeur of its spire. And in this silent rivalry, the bell tower became a marker of prestige. The townspeople, whether wealthy merchants, humble artisans, or farmers, contributed in various ways. Donations were gathered not only from nobles and bishops, but also from widows who gave coins, from children who carried pebbles, and from guilds that pledged their labor. These contributions were often inscribed into records, sometimes even carved discreetly into the stones themselves, ensuring that the memory of generosity would last as long as the tower. Yet alongside the reverence was also tension, for building required money in constant flow, and the collection of funds could become burdensome. Taxes were levied, trade tariffs increased, and disputes arose when merchants felt squeezed by the clergy's demands. Rumors occasionally spread that funds were being misused, that too much wealth went into stone, while the poor went hungry. Still, despite grumblings, the tower advanced, for no one wished to be the one who halted a work said to honor God. The organization of labor was a marvel of its own. Each craft had its hierarchy and duties. Stonemasons commanded great respect. Carpenters provided essential scaffolding and frames. Blacksmiths forged the iron tools that constantly dulled and needed renewal, while glaziers prepared to one day fit the windows with colored light. Laborers carried loads, mixed mortar or hauled water, and though their names were rarely recorded, without them, the mason's artistry would never have risen above the foundation. At the top of this hierarchy stood the master mason, both architect and engineer, whose vision guided every step. He designed not only the exterior, but also the hidden structures, staircases spiraling in darkness, chambers that one day would hold the bells, and the buttresses that absorbed the immense thrust of stone arches. His drawings, made with chalk or ink on parchment, were often kept secret, treasured like sacred knowledge. Apprentices and journeymen observed him closely, for to learn under a master was to glimpse mysteries that could not be found in books. The master mason was also judge and leader, settling disputes among workers, determining wages, and ensuring safety. Though accidents were inevitable, a falling block, a snapped rope, or a misstep from dizzying heights could end a life instantly, and when such tragedies occurred, the site mourned but pressed on, for halting would dishonor both the dead and the purpose of the tower. The rising structure gradually altered the skyline of the town. From distant fields, farmers could look up and see the progress week by week, the silhouette of scaffolding, the wooden cranes perched like strange birds on unfinished walls. Travelers approaching along roads would spot the tower long before they reached the gates, its outline serving as both guide and promise. At dusk, when the setting sun painted the stones in shades of gold and rose, the half-complete tower already inspired awe, a foretaste of the glory it would one day command. Within the site itself, life formed its own rhythm. The day began at dawn with the tolling of a bell that called workers to their stations. The air filled with the sound of hammers striking stone, saws rasping through wood, and the creak of cranes lifting their burdens. Dust floated in the sunlight, coating faces and clothes, making even the youngest apprentices appear aged. The mingling of smells, lime, sweat, wood shavings, and damp earth created an atmosphere that was as much sensory as it was spiritual. Breaks were brief, meals modest, but camaraderie was strong, for danger and labor bound men together more tightly than kinship sometimes could. Superstitions and rituals developed among the workers. Some carried charms or whispered prayers before climbing scaffolding, believing that angels watched over them. Certain days were considered unlucky for starting new work, and when storms struck suddenly, halting progress, it was seen as a divine reminder of human frailty. Yet despite fears and beliefs, the work advanced steadily, and year by year, the tower became more imposing. As the tower neared the height intended for the bells, anticipation grew. Bells were no ordinary instruments. They were voices of the community, calling to prayer, marking hours, warning of danger, or celebrating festivals. To build a chamber strong enough to hold them required particular care. The walls had to be thick, the arches perfectly balanced, for the swing of a great bell could shake stone loose if not supported properly. Carpenters fashioned wooden frames inside the chamber, preparing beams that would cradle the bells, while masons worked meticulously to ensure every joint was secure. The thought of bells one day ringing across the valley inspired the workers, for they knew their efforts would resound literally across generations. In the evenings, when tools were laid aside, the town sometimes gathered near the unfinished tower. Minstrels played, merchants sold food, children ran among the scaffolds, and pilgrims knelt in prayer. The tower was already more than stone. It was a theater of devotion, a stage for community life, and a visible sign of both human ambition and divine aspiration. Though incomplete, it already commanded reverence. And so, as darkness fell and torches flickered against the rising walls, workers and townsfolk alike could dream of the day when the bells would finally sound, proclaiming not only the glory of God, but also the triumph of every hand that had touched the stones. The bell tower by the stage was no longer simply a project, but a living presence that dominated the town, and its unfinished height was both a promise and a burden. As the masons and carpenters worked day by day, there was an unspoken awareness that what they were creating was intended to outlast them all, to stand against wind, storm, and the passage of centuries. The stones laid carried not only mortar, but also the imprint of every hand, the sweat of every brow, and the hopes of every family who had contributed in coin or labor. Each course of stone brought the tower closer to completion, but also higher into the realm of risk. For with each level, the scaffolding grew more precarious and the lifts more difficult. The cranes creaked under strain, ropes stretched, and workers had to trust not only their skill, but also their comrades, for one mistake could mean a fatal fall. It was said among them that only those without fear of heights could survive, but in truth, even the bravest felt their stomachs tighten as they looked down at the shrinking world below. The master mason supervised constantly, measuring angles with plumb lines and checking alignments with a keen eye, knowing that even a slight deviation at the base would magnify disastrously at the summit. Precision was their creed, and though tools were simple, skill compensated. Chisels rang against stone, carving blocks so exact that they seemed to join almost seamlessly. The mortar, mixed carefully with lime and sand, bound them into a mass that hardened like bone. Yet even as the tower grew, so too did its demands. Timber had to be fetched from distant forests, iron from smelters far away, and stone from quarries that seemed to exhaust themselves before the work was done. Caravans and river barges brought supplies, and their arrival was a small festival for the workers, who knew that without materials the project would falter. Entire trade networks pulsed in rhythm with the construction, and in this sense the bell tower connected not only heaven and earth, but also city and countryside. Inside the rising walls, staircases spiraled upward, dark and narrow, carved to endure the weight of countless feet. Each turn carried the visitor higher, and though still unfinished, these passages already felt sacred. Pilgrims sometimes paid to ascend the lower levels, eager to glimpse the view and to feel themselves closer to the divine. For the common folk, standing at the base and watching the structure ascend into clouds was enough to inspire both awe and humility. They believed that angels themselves might descend to rest upon the upper stones, and so the tower became a symbol of their prayers rising skyward. Life around the tower site was marked by rhythm and continuity. The bell to begin work rang at dawn, its tone echoing against half-built walls, and men clambered to their places with tools slung over shoulders. The morning air soon filled with sound, the sharp crack of hammer on stone, the scraping of saw through timber, the grunts of men hauling loads upward. Dust coated skin and hair until all looked alike, gray as the stones they shaped. Yet there was fellowship in hardship. Meals were taken together, bread dipped in broth, wine shared in wooden cups, laughter breaking through fatigue. Jokes and songs helped to ease the monotony, and sometimes a mason would carve a playful face or symbol into a hidden corner, leaving behind a personal mark for future generations to discover. The community outside watched with mixed feelings. Some admired the grandeur, proud that their town would be known across the land for such a monument. Others grumbled that the money could have built hospitals or repaired roads. But even the critics fell silent when they stood before the soaring structure, for the sheer scale quieted doubts and replaced them with a sense of inevitability. The tower must rise, because it already had risen so far. The anticipation of the bells themselves kept the spirit alive. Bells in those days were more than instruments. They were voices that ordered life. They marked the hours, called to worship, tolled for the dead, rang for weddings, and warned of fire or attack. To imagine such bells swinging in the high chamber filled people with a thrill, for their sound would carry across valleys, over rivers, and into the hearts of all who lived nearby. The day the bells would be hoisted into place was spoken of like a coming festival, and children dreamed of hearing their first toll echo across the rooftops. By nightfall, when tools were set aside, the tower stood in silence against the darkening sky. Torches flickered at its base, casting shadows that danced on the stones, and those passing by would pause, perhaps whisper a prayer, or simply marvel at what human hands could accomplish. The unfinished tower already felt eternal, its rising outline etched against the stars, and those who had labored upon it went to rest, knowing that tomorrow they would add one more stone, one more step toward heaven. And though many would never live to see its completion, they worked as if each day's effort were part of a sacred pact, binding their short lives into the long memory of stone. As the tower reached higher into the air, the challenges faced by the builders shifted from the ordinary struggles of lifting stone and timber to the extraordinary difficulties of working in the wind, the cold, and the constant strain of height. Up on the scaffolds, men sometimes felt the entire structure sway slightly, not because the stone was weak, but because all tall structures respond to the invisible push of the wind. To steady themselves, they tied ropes around their waists, though these were often little protection in the event of a true accident. A dropped hammer or chisel could clatter down many stories, shattering when it struck the ground, and such moments reminded everyone how precarious the work was. Superstition mixed with faith in these high places. Some workers made the sign of the cross before stepping onto the beams each morning, while others tucked small charms or tokens into their clothing, believing these would protect them from a fall. The master mason, however, trusted in geometry more than charms. He taught that every arch, every buttress, every bond of stone followed laws that, if respected, would make the tower as stable as the earth itself. And so he would pace the growing structure with a careful eye, measuring, checking, correcting. To him, the tower was less a monument and more a puzzle, a problem of weight and counterweight, of tension and balance. For all its majesty, it was also a feat of mathematics, and without that, no amount of faith could hold it standing. Life in the town adjusted to the rhythm of the tower. Merchants supplied food, leather, wool, and candles to the work crews. Farmers sent grain and meat, partly out of obligation and partly out of pride. Children lingered near the site, offering to carry water or sweep debris for a few coins. Travelers wrote of the site in their journals, describing how the tower could be seen from miles away, rising like a finger pointing to heaven. In time, it became a landmark, guiding those who approached the city even before it was complete. Still, the cost was heavy, taxes were levied, donations were expected, and those who could not give coin sometimes gave labor. It was a burden, but also an honor, for to participate in the building was to claim a place in history. Even the humblest worker could say, "I carried stone for the tower," and in that they felt a kind of immortality. Within the half-finished shell, carpenters were fashioning the chambers where the bells would eventually hang. These were not ordinary rooms, but vast open spaces reinforced with thick beams, for the swinging of a great bell exerts enormous force. The bells themselves were being cast elsewhere, in smoky foundries where molten bronze was poured into molds lined with clay and wax. Weeks of preparation went into each casting, and if a bell cracked during the process, all had to be done again. The townspeople spoke of these bells with reverence, giving them names and imagining their voices before they ever rang. Some believed the sound would drive away evil spirits, others that it would heal the sick, or at least bring comfort to the weary. The anticipation made each day of construction feel like a step toward a sacred revelation. At sunset, when the last load of stone had been hoisted and the last mallet blow echoed through the scaffolding, the workers descended slowly, their bodies aching, their hands blistered. Yet even in exhaustion, they would sometimes pause to gaze upward at what they had accomplished. There was pride, quiet but strong, in knowing that each stone added was part of something larger than themselves. And though their names would not be remembered in chronicles or carved in books, the tower itself would carry their memory. It would be their voice, their presence, long after they were dust. Meanwhile, the clergy reminded all that the tower was not for human glory alone, but for the glory of God. Sermons urged the people to give what they could, for to withhold support was to withhold honor from heaven. Some obeyed willingly, others reluctantly, yet all knew that once complete, the tower would belong to them all. And so, as seasons turned and years slipped quietly forward, the bell tower continued to rise, an ever-growing silhouette against the sky, at once a work site, a prayer in stone, and a dream that bound a town together. By the time the bell tower reached the height of the surrounding rooftops, the work had already taken years, and yet for the masons, carpenters, and laborers, the sense of time blurred into a steady rhythm of lifting, carving, measuring, and setting. And from below, the townspeople marveled at the progress, but those who worked at the top often saw little beyond the stone directly in front of them, their lives consumed by the routine of shaping blocks, hauling ropes, and ensuring the geometry remained true. Each new level brought heavier challenges, for the higher the tower grew, the more wind pressed against its walls and the more elaborate the scaffolding had to become. Long timbers were lashed together in frameworks that clung to the exterior like wooden skeletons, platforms stretching out to give men a place to stand, while ladders and ramps connected one section to another. Moving materials upward became an entire operation in itself. Donkeys and oxen dragged carts of stone to the base, where men loaded them onto pulley systems controlled by great wooden wheels. These wheels were turned by laborers, walking inside them, their footsteps creating the power to lift tons of stone into the air. It was exhausting work, monotonous and dangerous, for a slip inside the wheel could mean a crushed limb or worse. Yet without such human-powered engines, the tower would never have risen. Inside, carpenters fitted beams to support the growing interior, fashioning temporary floors where workers could rest and store tools. The smell of resin and fresh-cut wood mingled with the dust of limestone, filling the air with a distinctive aroma that marked the space as both workshop and sacred ground. And though unfinished, the echo of hammer blows and shouted commands gave the interior a kind of life, as though the building itself were breathing. Visitors who ventured near often described a strange sensation upon entering the incomplete tower, an awareness that it was already holy, even before its bells ever rang. The presence of so many men working toward a single purpose seemed to transform the air, lending it both weight and reverence. Beyond the labor, there was also the matter of design. For as the tower rose, choices had to be made about ornamentation. Should the windows be plain or adorned with tracery? Should the corners be sharp and severe, or softened with carved figures of saints and angels? These decisions were not merely aesthetic, but symbolic, for every detail was intended to reflect the majesty of heaven and the eternal truths of faith. Yet at times, the master mason clashed with church officials, who demanded grandeur beyond what was practical. It was his task to balance ambition with stability, ensuring the tower would stand for centuries, rather than collapse under its own weight. The townspeople, meanwhile, watched with mixed feelings. Some were proud, seeing in the tower a symbol of their community's devotion and strength. Others grumbled that too much money and labor were consumed by the project while fields needed tending and roads needed repair. And yet no one could deny the awe inspired by its rising form. Travelers passing through often paused to sketch it, noting how the sun caught its upper stones at dawn and how the shadows stretched across the marketplace in the evening. At night, when work ceased and silence fell, the tower loomed like a sentinel, its unfinished silhouette dark against the stars. The workers themselves carried stories home to their families, stories of close calls with falling stones, of jokes shared high on the scaffolds, of prayers whispered before stepping onto a beam no wider than a man's foot. Children listened with wide-eyed eyes, imagining the tower as both a marvel and a monster, something that could both protect and devour. To them, it was not only a building, but a living presence, growing day by day, its completion a dream both distant and inevitable. And still the work continued, each hammer strike and chisel mark a small contribution to a vision larger than any one life. For though generations might pass before the last stone was set, Every man who labored there knew that he was part of a story that would outlast him. The bell tower, rising slowly into the heavens, was not merely a structure of stone and wood, but a monument of human faith, endurance, and imagination, destined to speak long after the voices of its builders were gone. As the tower rose higher, nearing the point where its bells would one day be hung, the work demanded even greater precision and endurance. The stones used at this stage were smaller, but had to be fitted with utmost accuracy, for even the slightest misalignment could create cracks that might grow with the weight above. The masons measured and remeasured, using plumb lines dangling from wooden frames and sighting rods to ensure the verticals held true. From below, the tower looked strong and serene, but at the top it was a place of constant motion, with ropes creaking, scaffolding swaying in the wind, and voices shouting instructions back and forth. For the men who worked there, every step carried risk. A gust of wind could catch a man off balance, and the higher they climbed, the more treacherous even a minor mistake became. And yet life continued around the construction, almost as if two worlds existed side by side. Down in the marketplace, vendors sold their goods, children chased one another through narrow alleys, and farmers brought their produce into town. Meanwhile, above them all, the laborers toiled day after day, their bodies growing lean and calloused, their skin weathered by sun and rain. Some took pride in the idea that their work touched heaven. Others admitted privately that they longed for the project to end so they could rest. But none could walk away, for the tower had become not only a duty, but also a bond, a shared destiny, tying the lives of hundreds together. To fuel such enormous effort, careful organization was required. The cathedral chapter kept records of expenses, tallying the cost of each cartload of stone, each bundle of timber, each day of labor. Accounts were written in ledgers with ink that would fade in centuries, but served as proof that every penny was tracked. Sometimes disputes erupted, with townsfolk questioning whether too much money was being diverted to the tower, while their own roofs leaked or their wells needed repair. Yet the church held firm, arguing that to build a house for God was to secure the blessing of heaven for all. The bells themselves were another challenge. Cast from bronze in fiery furnaces, they were massive, each weighing hundreds or even thousands of pounds. Before they could ever be raised into position, they had to be tested for their tone. Craftsmen struck them with hammers, listening closely to hear whether they produced the pure, resonant sound that would carry across the valley. If a bell cracked or rang false, the entire process had to be repeated, wasting precious time and resources. And so, prayers were whispered even in the foundries, for success was never guaranteed. When at last the bells were ready, they were hauled into the air by massive wooden wheels and pulley systems, the entire town gathering to watch the dangerous ascent. Some crossed themselves as the bells rose, fearing that if the ropes snapped, disaster would rain down. Yet when the bells reached their niches and were secured in their timber frames, a collective sigh of relief echoed through the square. Though they would not be rung until the tower was fully finished, their silent presence was already a promise of what was to come. Meanwhile, high above, the workers continued adding decorative elements. Gargoyles were carved to channel rainwater away from the stonework. Their grotesque faces meant both to serve a practical purpose and to remind the faithful of the dangers of sin. Saints and angels were shaped from limestone blocks, their features chiseled with patient hands that often belonged to men who could barely read, but who left behind art that would endure for centuries. Every figure carried symbolic meaning: a sword-wielding archangel to defend the church, a solemn saint to inspire humility, a lamb to symbolize sacrifice. To stand among these sculptures while still half complete was to feel suspended between heaven and earth. As dusk settled, the tower cast long shadows across the town, its upper scaffolds outlined against the red sky. Torches flickered as men carried down their tools, their shoulders heavy, but their spirits bound by the knowledge that each day brought them closer to a vision too immense for any single generation. And yet, they also knew that even if they finished, they might never live to hear the first full peal of bells. For the building of a bell tower was less a task with an end and more a testament to endurance itself. The tower, in its rising form, was not just a structure of stone, but a dialogue between the earthly and the divine, between those who labored with hands and those who dreamed with hearts. and its slow progress embodied the truth that some achievements are meant to be pursued even when their completion lies beyond one's lifetime. As the cathedral bell tower neared its full height, the challenges became even more intense. Not because the stones were heavier, but because the logistics of lifting them hundreds of feet into the air required remarkable ingenuity and constant vigilance. The wooden cranes that dotted the scaffolding grew larger, their ropes thicker, and their counterweights heavier, each creaking under the strain of hauling materials skyward. The men who worked these cranes relied on sheer muscle, turning great treadwheels with their own bodies, walking inside them like hamsters in cages, their steps slowly but steadily pulling the stones upward. Each rotation brought another block into place, and though it may have looked monotonous, one slip of a foot or one frayed rope could bring calamity. Below, the townspeople watched with awe, often gathering in the square as if the daily work itself were a spectacle. For them, the tower had become a living presence, dominating the skyline and serving as a constant reminder of human determination. To children born during the project, the tower had always been there, though never complete, and they measured their own growth against its rising form. For the older generation, it was a symbol of time slipping away, proof that their years were being spent in service of something greater than themselves. Meanwhile, inside the partially completed tower, carpenters built wooden platforms to hold scaffolding, staircases, and eventually the bell frames. The smell of freshly cut oak filled the air, mingling with the scent of lime mortar and the faint tang of iron tools. Dark corners echoed with the sound of chisels tapping against stone, a steady rhythm that never ceased. Some workers left carved initials hidden on inner blocks, secret marks of their presence that would be concealed forever once the tower was sealed. Centuries later, restorers would sometimes stumble upon these faint scratches and realize that behind the grandeur of architecture lay the quiet fingerprints of ordinary men. As the final levels were added, the architects faced constant questions of stability. Would the tower lean under its own weight? Would the soil beneath hold the load? To guard against disaster, builders added buttresses at lower levels and inspected each crack with nervous care. Heavy iron clamps secured vulnerable joints, and wedges of lead filled tiny gaps to absorb strain. When storms rolled across the horizon, the workers paused and stared upward, fearful of lightning striking the scaffolds. More than one tower in Europe had collapsed before completion, and such memories haunted those who gave their strength to this structure. And yet, faith propelled them onward. Priests blessed the stones, sprinkling holy water as if to safeguard not only the work, but the lives of those laboring upon it. On certain feast days, the townsfolk gathered beneath the tower for processions, carrying candles and banners, chanting prayers that echoed off the unfinished walls. These ceremonies reminded everyone that the tower was not just an ambitious engineering feat, but a spiritual beacon, a promise that heaven itself could be approached through stone and sweat. Finally, the spire began to take form, slender compared to the massive base, rising with an elegance that seemed almost impossible after the bulk of the lower levels. This delicate crown would one day pierce the sky and announce the presence of the cathedral for miles around. Workers shaped intricate tracery, delicate as lace, though cut from solid stone, and hoisted it piece by piece to dizzying heights. Standing on narrow beams, with the earth spinning below, masons bent to their chisels, knowing that even a slip of the hand could mar what generations would gaze upon. The air was colder up there, the wind harsher, and time seemed stretched, as if every hour of labor was both endless and fleeting. At night, when torches flickered along the scaffolds, the unfinished spire glowed like a lantern suspended in the dark. Travelers arriving from distant villages saw it shimmering above the town, a beacon of both human aspiration and divine ambition. For the people who built it, the tower became part of their very identity. To say one worked on the tower was enough to command respect, for all knew the courage it required. Some spoke of how their fathers had laid the first stones, how their children might one day see it completed, and how their own names would be forgotten, though their work endured. And in this way, the bell tower grew not only from stone and wood, but from the passing of time itself, a layered monument of lives lived, prayers whispered, and generations bound by a single, shared vision that reached ever upward. The day the bells were finally hoisted into the completed tower was remembered by the entire town as a moment unlike any other. After decades of construction, after lifetimes of toil, the tower stood ready to fulfill its purpose. The bells themselves had been cast in nearby foundries, where molten bronze poured into great molds cooled slowly and emerged as instruments of immense size and weight. Each bell was given a name, often after saints or holy patrons, and was blessed by the clergy before being hauled through the streets on wooden carts. Children ran beside them in excitement. Women carried flowers, and old men leaned on their canes to watch the spectacle. These bells were not merely tools to mark the hours. They were voices of the community, destined to call the faithful to prayer, to toll in grief at funerals, to ring out in joy on feast days, and to echo across the countryside in moments of triumph or alarm. Getting the bells into place was a feat of engineering nearly as complex as building the tower itself. Wooden cranes creaked and ropes strained as teams of men slowly raised the massive weights skyward. The crowd held its breath as each bell ascended, swaying slightly in the air, until at last it reached its platform high above. Carpenters had built sturdy frames of oak to hold them, ensuring that the vibrations of the bells would not crack the masonry. When the largest bell, heavier than an ox cart, was finally set into its cradle, cheers erupted below, echoing against the stone walls. Priests raised their hands in blessing, and some workers fell to their knees, overcome with relief and pride. The first time the bells rang together, the entire town trembled. Deep, resonant notes rolled across rooftops, through alleyways, and into distant fields. Farmers stopped their plows to listen. Merchants paused their bargaining. Even the birds seemed to hesitate in flight, startled by the power of that sound. It was not just noise but music, an overwhelming harmony that seemed to connect heaven and earth. For the builders, it was a reward beyond measure. They had endured blisters, broken bones, accidents, and storms. They had given years of their lives, and many had not lived to see this day. Yet now, in the mighty chorus of bronze, they heard their sacrifices transformed into something eternal. The tower itself seemed alive, its voice carrying far beyond the town walls, announcing its presence to travelers and pilgrims approaching from miles away. Life quickly adjusted around the new sound. The bells marked the rhythm of daily existence: morning prayers, midday work, evening rest. They signaled danger when fires broke out or when armies threatened the borders. They tolled for the dead, their somber notes mingling with tears, and they rang joyfully for weddings, baptisms, and festivals. In this way, the tower became not just a building but a heartbeat for the community, shaping the lives of all who dwelt within earshot. Over time, legends grew around the tower. Some whispered that the sound of the bells could drive away storms, while others claimed they could cure sickness if rung at the right hour. Children dared each other to climb as high as they could inside, tracing the spiral staircases that wound through the stone like veins. Pilgrims left offerings at its base, believing that prayers spoken beneath the tower rose more swiftly to heaven. And yet, the passage of years also brought inevitable change. New generations inherited the tower, scarcely remembering a time when it was incomplete. To them, it was as permanent as the hills or the river, a fixture of the landscape. But the older ones remembered when it had been only a dream, when each stone had been a risk, when faith and labor had been all they possessed. To them, every toll of the bell was a reminder of the miracle of persistence. Centuries later, some towers would crumble, others would be struck by lightning, and some would be rebuilt after war and fire. But each time, the will to restore them proved just as strong as the will that had first raised them. The act of building, of striving upward, of creating something that outlived its makers, this was the legacy of the cathedral bell tower. And so, as the sun set behind the completed spire and the bells rang out across fields turning gold in the twilight, the people knew they had created not just a tower, but a symbol of endurance, of community, of faith carved into stone and sung through bronze. They had taken earth, wood, fire, and sweat, and from it shaped a monument that would echo long after their names were forgotten. The bell tower stood as both an achievement of human hands and a gesture toward the eternal, reaching higher than lives could reach, but carrying within its stones the quiet proof that those lives had mattered. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with Sleepy Whisper. May your morning, when you wake, be filled with good fortune, quiet joy, and success in all that you do. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow night, right here at Sleepy Whisper.